What happens when the most powerful man in the city discovers the truth was a lie, and the miracle he abandoned is growing in the woman he destroyed? Damien Vescari never begged, never pleaded. He built an empire where his word was law and mercy was weakness. But when he saw his ex-wife across that rain-soaked street, one hand protecting the impossible curve of her belly, the ground beneath his carefully constructed world cracked wide open. The doctor said never. The divorce papers said final. But that baby bump said something else entirely. And Damien Vescari was about to learn that some mistakes can't be fixed with power, only with truth. Follow this story to the end, hit that like button, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this journey reaches. The exam room smelled like antiseptic and the death of dreams. Damien Vescari sat perfectly still in the chair beside the examination table, his hands folded in his lap, his expression carved from granite. To anyone watching, he looked calm, composed, in control. But Leah knew better. She'd learned to read the micro-tensions in his jaw, the slight whitening of his knuckles, the way his breathing went shallow when the world wasn't bending to his will. Doctor. Patricia Chen sat across from them, her hands folded on the desk, her expression professionally sympathetic in that way that made Leah's stomach turn. She'd seen that look before. On social workers, on lawyers, on people who were about to deliver news that would fracture your life into before and after. I've reviewed all the tests, Dr. Chen said quietly. The hormone panels, the ultrasounds, the genetic screenings. I've consulted with 3 specialists, and I'm afraid the conclusion is unanimous. Leah felt Damien's hand find hers. His palm was warm, steady, but she could feel the tension vibrating beneath his skin like a wire pulled too tight. Mrs. Vescari, Dr. Chen continued, her eyes soft with practiced compassion. Your uterine scarring is extensive. The endometrial damage from your previous infection was severe. Combined with the structural abnormalities we've identified, the likelihood of you carrying a pregnancy to term is, she paused, choosing her words carefully, statistically negligible. I'm very sorry, but natural conception and pregnancy aren't viable options for you. The word hung in the air like smoke. Never. Leah heard it echo in the silence that followed. Not difficult, not unlikely. Never. As in, don't hope, don't try. Don't waste your time dreaming about nurseries and tiny socks and the weight of new life in your arms. What about IVF? Damien's voice was controlled, clinical. He was already problem-solving, already looking for the angle, the leverage, the way to make reality bend. Surrogacy? Dr. Chen's expression didn't change. IVF would require viable eggs and a receptive uterine environment. Mrs. Vescari's hormone levels and uterine condition make egg retrieval extremely difficult and implantation nearly impossible. As for surrogacy, yes, that could be an option, but it would require extensive legal planning, significant medical oversight, and there's no guarantee of success even then. So you're saying there's a chance? Damien's voice had that edge now, the one that made men twice his size step back. I'm saying, Doctor, Chen replied carefully, that the obstacles are significant enough that I would advise you both to explore other paths to building your family. Adoption. Foster care. There are many ways to... We don't want other paths. Damien's voice was still quiet, still controlled, but Leah felt him pulling away even as his hand remained in hers. We want our child. Dr. Chen's eyes flicked to Leah, a question in them, but Leah couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but sit there while the future she'd imagined, the one where she gave Damien the air he needed, where she proved her worth in the only currency his world understood, dissolved like sugar in rain. I understand this is devastating news, Dr. Chen said gently. I can recommend some excellent counselors who specialize in fertility grief. And if you decide to pursue surrogacy, I can refer you to Itch. We're done here. Damien stood, his movements precise and controlled. He didn't wait for Leah, didn't help her down from the table, just walked out of the room with the kind of quiet fury that made the air feel thin. Leah gathered her purse with shaking hands. Dr. Chen touched her arm gently. Mrs. Vescari, I know this is overwhelming, but please don't lose hope. There are options. Thank you, Leah whispered, because what else was there to say? She couldn't explain that for Damien Vescari, heir to the Vescari crime empire, options weren't good enough. Legacy wasn't negotiable. Blood wasn't optional. She found him in the parking garage, leaning against the black Mercedes, smoking a cigarette even though he'd quit 2 years ago. His profile was sharp against the concrete and shadow, beautiful and unreachable. "Damien, get in the car, Leah." She did. They drove home in silence, the city blurring past the tinted windows, neither of them speaking, neither of them touching. The 20-minute drive felt like crossing continents. Their penthouse overlooked the river, all glass and steel and carefully curated art that cost more than most people made in a year. Leah had decorated it herself, tried to make it feel like a home instead of a showroom. But tonight, walking into that beautiful, empty space, it felt exactly like what it was. A cage made of money and marble. Damien went straight to his study. He didn't slam the door. That would have been better, somehow. Instead, he closed it with a soft click that sounded like a verdict. Leah stood in the foyer, still wearing her coat, still holding her purse, trying to remember how to breathe. The first week, she told herself it was shock. He needed time to process, to grieve, to adjust to a future that looked different than the one he'd planned. She made his favorite meals, left them outside his study door. Most went untouched. She tried to talk to him, to reach past the walls he was building brick by silent brick. He was polite, distant, careful. Like she was a stranger he was trying not to offend. "We could look into surrogacy," she offered one night, her voice small in the cavernous bedroom they no longer shared in any meaningful way. Damien slept on his side, she slept on hers, and the space between them felt like an ocean. Dr. Chen said, "I heard what she said." Damien's voice was flat. He didn't look at her, just stared at the ceiling like the answers might be written there. "I'll think about it." But he didn't. She could tell. Because thinking required engagement, and Damien had already checked out. He was there physically, sleeping in their bed, eating breakfast at their table, kissing her forehead before he left for work. But the man she'd married, the one who'd looked at her like she was the answer to questions he didn't know how to ask, was gone. In his place was a ghost going through motions. The second week, Leah stopped cooking, started sleeping in the guest room. If he noticed, he didn't say anything. The third week, she tried one more time. She found him in his study late one night, paperwork spread across the massive mahogany desk, a glass of scotch at his elbow. He looked up when she entered, and for a moment, just a heartbeat, she saw something in his eyes that looked like pain. "Can we talk?" she asked quietly. Damien set down his pen, gestured to the chair across from him, the same chair where business associates sat when they came to negotiate deals, where enemies sat before they became allies or corpses. Leah didn't sit. She stood in front of his desk, wrapped her arms around herself, and asked the question that had been burning in her chest for 3 weeks. "Are you leaving me?" Damien's expression didn't change. He picked up his scotch, took a slow sip, set it down with careful precision. "I don't know," he said finally. It was the honesty that broke her. If he'd lied, if he'd said, "Of course not," or "Don't be ridiculous," she could have clung to that. But Damien had always been brutally, devastatingly honest. It was one of the things she'd loved about him. "I can't give you what you need." The words tasted like ash in her mouth. "An heir, a legacy, the future you planned." "No," Damien agreed quietly. "You can't." Leah felt something inside her chest crack clean through. "So this is it? 3 years of marriage and one medical diagnosis erases everything?" "Don't." Damien's voice went sharp. "Don't make this about love. You know what my life requires, what my position demands. This isn't personal, Leah." "Not personal." She laughed, but it came out broken. "You're ending our marriage because my body failed you, and you're telling me it's not personal?" Damien stood, moved around the desk, but stopped 3 feet away. Close enough to touch, but he didn't. He never did anymore. "In my world," he said quietly, "legacy is survival. An heir isn't a luxury, it's insurance. It's the only thing that keeps vultures from circling. You think I'm being cruel, but I'm being practical. Without a clear line of succession, everything I've built becomes a target. Every rival, every ambitious lieutenant, every enemy I've made. They'll all come for it the moment they sense weakness." "So marry someone else," Leah whispered. "Find someone who can give you what I can't. But don't stand there and pretend this is strategy when it's just cowardice. His jaw tightened. For a moment she thought he might argue, might fight, might give her something real to push against. Instead, he just looked at her with those beautiful empty eyes and said, "Maybe you're right." The divorce took 6 weeks. No lawyers screaming across conference tables. No fights over assets or alimony. Damien gave her everything she asked for, and more. The apartment in the city, the car, enough money to live comfortably for the rest of her life. He was generous in the way powerful men are when they're trying to absolve themselves of guilt. They met one final time to sign the papers. A sterile office, a disinterested notary, 2 signatures that ended what 3 years couldn't sustain. Leah waited for him to say something, anything, an apology, an explanation. A moment of the man she'd married breaking through the ice. But Damien just stood, buttoned his jacket with mechanical precision, and walked out of the room without looking back. Leah sat there long after he'd gone, staring at her signature on the dissolution papers, wondering how a love that had felt so inevitable could end so quietly. No shouting, no tears, no dramatic goodbyes, just silence that felt like burial. 3 months later, Leah had built a new life from the ruins of the old one. She'd moved out of the penthouse, couldn't stand living in a space that still smelled like him, still echoed with memories of mornings wrapped in Egyptian cotton and nights spent talking until dawn. Instead, she'd found a small brownstone in a quieter neighborhood, the kind of place where people actually knew their neighbors' names. She'd started volunteering at a women's shelter, helping women who were escaping situations far worse than a broken marriage. It gave her purpose, reminded her that survival wasn't the same as living, but it was a start. She'd stopped checking Damien's social media, stopped torturing herself with photos of him at galas and charity events, always alone, always unreachable, always perfect. She'd started therapy, started yoga, started all the things women do when they're trying to piece themselves back together after men like Damien Viscari decide they're disposable. And then, on a random Tuesday afternoon, Leah's carefully reconstructed world tilted on its axis. She was in the bathroom of her brownstone, staring at 3 plastic sticks lined up on the marble counter. 3 different brands, 3 different tests, all telling her the same impossible thing. Pregnant. Leah's hand shook as she picked up the first test, held it up to the light like maybe the angle would change the result. But the pink lines were clear, unmistakable, unambiguous. She sat down on the bathroom floor, her back against the tub, and started laughing. Not the joyful kind, the kind that sounds too much like crying. Statistically negligible, Dr. Chen had said. Nearly impossible. But apparently, somewhere between nearly and never, Leah's body had decided to rewrite its own story. She should have been terrified. She was 29, newly divorced, and carrying the child of a man who'd walked away because she couldn't do exactly this. She should have been panicking, calling lawyers, figuring out how to tell Damien that the medical certainty that had destroyed their marriage was a lie. But all Leah felt was a fierce, protective joy that started in her chest and spread like wildfire. This baby, this impossible, miraculous, stubborn little life, was hers. Not Damien's heir, not a legacy or insurance policy or strategic asset. Hers. And she wasn't going to share it with a man who'd proven that love was conditional on utility. The decision should have been harder, should have involved soul-searching and moral debates and lengthy conversations with trusted friends. But Leah knew, with a clarity that surprised her, that telling Damien would mean losing control of the one thing in her life that was entirely hers. He'd want custody agreements and parenting schedules and DNA tests. He'd turn her miracle into a negotiation. Or worse, he'd decide that one baby wasn't enough to rebuild what they'd lost. That the damage was too deep, the trust too broken, and Leah couldn't survive him rejecting their child the way he'd rejected her. So she kept the secret. It was easier than she expected. They moved in completely different circles now. She deleted his number, blocked his social media, excised him from her life with surgical precision. She told her friends she was focusing on herself, took up residence in loose sweaters and flowing dresses, scheduled all her OB appointments in a practice across town, paid cash to avoid insurance trails. Dr. Sarah Kim was young, warm, and refreshingly honest. "Your file says you were told pregnancy was nearly impossible," Dr. Kim said during their first appointment, reviewing Leah's medical history with a slight frown. "But your hormone levels are excellent. Your uterine lining is responding beautifully. Everything looks healthy." "So the original diagnosis was wrong?" Leah asked quietly. Dr. Kim hesitated. "I'd need to review the exact tests and findings from your previous physician, but based on what I'm seeing now, yes. It appears the severity of your condition was either misdiagnosed or has improved significantly." She looked up, her expression gentle. "This is good news, Leah. Great news, actually. You're having a healthy pregnancy." Leah pressed her hand to her still flat stomach, feeling something shift in her chest. Relief, rage, a complicated grief for the marriage that had died from a lie neither of them had known to question. "Does the father know?" Dr. Kim asked carefully. "No," Leah said firmly. "And he won't. This is my baby, mine alone." Dr. Kim studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Okay, then let's make sure you and this little one stay healthy." As the weeks passed and her body changed, Leah felt herself transforming in ways that had nothing to do with the baby. She'd spent 3 years as Damien Viscari's wife, learning to be elegant and accommodating, learning to smile at the right moments and stay silent at the right times, learning to make herself small enough to fit into the spaces his empire left for her. But now, with life growing inside her, Leah felt herself expanding, taking up room, claiming space. She wasn't Damien's discarded wife anymore. She was a mother. And that identity, fierce and primal and entirely her own, was bigger than any marriage certificate or divorce decree. By the time she hit 5 months, the bump was undeniable. She stopped going to public places where she might be recognized, ordered groceries online, became a ghost in her own city. It should have felt lonely, isolating. Instead, it felt like freedom. The rain started just after 3 in the afternoon, turning the November sky the color of old bruises. Leah had a doctor's appointment at 4, which meant she needed to leave soon if she wanted to avoid traffic. She grabbed her raincoat, her purse, checked her reflection one last time in the hall mirror. At 5.5 months, there was no hiding it anymore. The bump was prominent, unmistakable, beautiful. She ran her hand over it gently, felt the flutter of movement that still took her breath away. "Just you and me, little one," she whispered. "That's all we need." The walk to the subway was only 3 blocks, but the rain was coming down harder now, turning the sidewalk slick and treacherous. Leah kept one hand on her belly, the other clutching her umbrella, her eyes on the pavement. She didn't see him until she was halfway across the intersection at 5th and Madison. Didn't notice the black Mercedes idling at the light, or the man behind the wheel who'd frozen mid-reach for his phone. But Damien saw her. And in the space of a single heartbeat, his entire world collapsed. Because there, walking carefully through the rain with one protective hand curved over an unmistakable baby bump, was his ex-wife. Leah, who couldn't have children, who'd been told never by doctors who'd staked their reputations on that single, devastating word. Leah, who was very clearly, very undeniably pregnant. The car behind Damien honked. He didn't move, couldn't move, just sat there staring, his mind trying to catch up with what his eyes were seeing. The light changed. More horns. Damien pulled through the intersection on autopilot, found a parking spot half a block up, and abandoned the car with the engine still running. He followed her. Not as Damien Viscari, crime lord and empire builder. As a man who'd just seen the ghost of a future he'd murdered come back to life. Leah didn't notice him trailing 20 feet behind. She was focused on navigating the wet pavement, on protecting the precious cargo she carried, on getting to her appointment on time. She turned into a medical building on Lexington, shook out her umbrella in the lobby, headed for the elevators. Damien caught the closing doors with his palm, stepped inside before she could protest. Leah's head snapped up. Their eyes met in the elevator's mirrored walls. For a moment, neither of them breathed. Then Leah's hand moved to her belly, protective, instinctive, claiming, and Damien felt something in his chest crack wide open. "Leah," he said, and his voice came out rough, raw. Nothing like the controlled tone he'd perfected over years of command. She didn't speak, just stared at him like he was a ghost or a nightmare. Her face had gone pale, her eyes wide, her breath coming short and sharp. The elevator climbed. 3rd floor, 4th, 5th. "Is it mine?" Damien asked, because he was a man who'd built empires on certainty, and he needed to know if the ground beneath him was solid or smoke. Leah's laugh was bitter. Broken. Why would it be yours, Damien? I'm infertile, remember? Statistically negligible. Nearly impossible. Those were the words that ended our marriage. Answer the question. His voice had that edge now, the one that made grown men confess sins they'd buried deep. But Leah wasn't one of his soldiers. Wasn't intimidated by power or position. She'd loved him once, and he'd killed that love with silence and distance and the cowardice she'd named correctly. It doesn't matter, she said quietly. You made your choice. The elevator stopped. 6th floor. The doors opened onto a hallway that smelled like antiseptic and new beginnings. Leah stepped out without looking back, but Damien followed because walking away was what had destroyed them the first time, and he'd be damned if he made the same mistake twice. Leah, wait! She turned on him then, and the fury in her eyes could have melted steel. Don't you dare follow me. Don't you dare act like you have rights here. If that's my child, if? She laughed again, and it sounded like shattered glass. You want a paternity test? Blood work? Legal proof? Fine, but it won't change anything, Damien. You left because I couldn't give you an heir. Well, congratulations. I can, but you don't get to claim this baby just because biology says you contributed DNA. That's not... Damien stopped, because what could he say? That he'd made a mistake? That he'd been wrong? That he'd spent 3 months in a penthouse that felt like a mausoleum, trying to convince himself that duty mattered more than the woman who'd made him believe in something beyond power? I was protecting it, Leah whispered, and her voice cracked. Protecting us. Because I knew that if I told you, you'd make this about legacy and succession and all the things that matter more to you than love. And I couldn't... Her breath hitched. I couldn't watch you reject this baby the way you rejected me. The words hit Damien like bullets. Because she was right. Because 3 months ago, he would have done exactly that. Would have made it about empire and inheritance and whether one child was enough to secure what he'd built. But standing in that hallway, watching Leah's hand curve protectively over their impossible miracle, Damien realized something that should have been obvious from the beginning. He was a fool. How far along? He asked quietly. Leah's jaw tightened. Why? Because I'm trying to do the math. He took a careful step closer. She didn't back away, but everything about her body language screamed, don't touch. Trying to figure out how long you've been carrying our child alone. How many appointments I've missed. How many nights you've been scared or sick or... 22 weeks, Leah said flatly. Almost 5.5 months, and I haven't been alone. I've had Dr. Kim, I've had friends, I've had myself. I didn't need you then, Damien, and I don't need you now. But her voice shook on the last word, and Damien heard what she wasn't saying. I needed you then, and you weren't there. Let me fix this, he said, and he hated how desperate he sounded. Damien Viscari didn't beg, didn't plead, but this wasn't business, this was Leah, and the child he'd wanted so badly he'd destroyed everything to get it, only to find out he'd already had the answer in the woman he'd abandoned. You can't, Leah whispered. Some things can't be fixed with money or power or... I know. Damien's voice cracked. I know I fucked up. I know I was a coward. I know I let fear make me stupid. But Leah, please, let me try. Let me be there. For you. For our baby. For Mrs. Arden? A nurse appeared in the doorway of the OB practice, clipboard in hand, professional smile in place. Dr. Kim is ready for you. Leah looked at Damien one more time. Her eyes were wet, but her voice was steady. Go home, Damien, she said quietly. Go back to your empire and your legacy and all the things that mattered more than us. This baby and I, we'll be fine without you. We have to be. Then she walked through the door and disappeared, leaving Damien standing alone in a hallway that smelled like hospitals and regret, his hands shaking, his chest tight with the kind of panic that no amount of power could fix. He'd found her, and he'd already lost her all over again. Damien stood in that hallway for 10 minutes after Leah disappeared, staring at the door like it might open again if he willed it hard enough. Like she might come back out and tell him this was all a nightmare, or better yet, give him another chance to fix what he'd broken. But the door stayed closed, and eventually a security guard approached with the kind of polite firmness that meant you need to leave now. Damien left, got back in his car, drove to the penthouse on autopilot, his mind replaying the moment he'd seen her in that crosswalk, the protective curve of her hand over their child, the look in her eyes when she'd told him to go home. "We'll be fine without you. We have to be." The words echoed in his skull like a verdict. He'd spent 3 months convincing himself he'd made the right choice. That duty and legacy mattered more than love. That walking away from Leah was strategic, necessary, the only logical move for a man in his position. But logic didn't explain why his penthouse felt like a tomb, why he worked 18-hour days just to avoid going home to a bed that still smelled like her perfume. Why he'd fired 2 separate matchmakers his mother had hired, because none of the women they'd paraded in front of him were Leah. And now he had proof that everything he'd destroyed was built on a lie. The diagnosis was wrong. Leah could have children, was having his child, had been carrying their baby for 5.5 months while he'd been playing at moving on, pretending his world made sense without her in it. Damien poured himself 3 fingers of scotch and drank it standing at the window, looking out at the city lights blurring in the rain. Then he pulled out his phone and made a call. "Marcus?" he said when his head of security answered. "I need information. Everything you can find on Leah Arden, formerly Leah Viscari. Where she's living, where she's getting prenatal care, who she's been seeing. I want a full report by morning." "Boss," Marcus hesitated. "You sure that's wise? She's got a restraining order filed against—" "She what?" "Filed it 2 weeks ago. Protective order. Says you're not to come within 500 feet of her or her residence." Damien's hand tightened on the phone. I haven't been anywhere near—" "I know," Marcus said carefully. "Which is why the judge sealed it pending review. But it's there. Legal and binding. You approach her again, she can have you arrested." Damien closed his eyes. Of course Leah had protected herself. She was smart, strategic, always 3 moves ahead. She'd known he'd find out eventually, and she'd made sure she had legal armor in place before he could use his power to override her choices. "Cancel the report," Damien said quietly. "And Marcus? If anyone tries to follow her, surveil her, or invade her privacy in any way, I want their name, because I'll handle them personally." He hung up before Marcus could respond. For a long moment, Damien just stood there, scotch glass empty in his hand, rain hammering against the windows. Then he did something he hadn't done in 15 years. He called his mother. Gabriella Vescari answered on the second ring, her voice sharp, with the kind of alertness that came from decades of sleeping light in a world where enemies didn't knock. "Damien, it's 11 o'clock. Someone better be dead or dying." "Leah's pregnant." Silence. Then, "I'm coming over." She hung up. 20 minutes later, Gabriella swept into his penthouse like a force of nature wrapped in Chanel and controlled fury. She was 63, silver-haired, and more dangerous than half the men in Damien's organization. She'd survived 3 different attempts on her life, buried 2 husbands, and raised Damien to inherit an empire that should have destroyed him by the time he was 25. She looked at her son now with the kind of X-ray vision that had always seen past his carefully constructed masks. "Tell me everything," she commanded, settling onto his leather sofa like it was a throne. "And don't leave out the parts that make you look like an idiot." So Damien told her. The diagnosis, the divorce, seeing Leah in the crosswalk, the confrontation in the elevator, the restraining order. When he finished, Gabriella was quiet for a long moment, studying him with dark eyes that missed nothing. "You're a fool," she said finally. "I know." "No, you don't, because a fool learns from his mistakes. You're still making them." She leaned forward. "Did you ask her what happened? Did you question the original diagnosis? Did you do anything besides assume the worst and run?" The doctor said nearly impossible. Not impossible, nearly. And you heard what you wanted to hear because it gave you permission to be a coward. Gabriella's voice was scalpel sharp. Your father did the same thing when he found out I'd had 2 miscarriages before you. Decided I was defective. Started looking at younger, more fertile options. Her smile was cold. I made him regret that. Thoroughly. Damien had heard the stories, how his mother had systematically dismantled every potential replacement his father had considered, using blackmail and strategic alliances, and in one case, a very convenient car accident. By the time she was done, Antonio Viscari had learned that Gabriella wasn't disposable. And then she'd given him Damien, proving that persistence mattered more than probability. "Leah's not you," Damien said quietly. "No," Gabriella agreed. "She's smarter. She got out before you completely destroyed her, and now she's protecting herself and her child from a man who proved that love is conditional on utility." She stood, smoothed her skirt with elegant precision. "You want to fix this? Then you need to understand something, Damien. That baby isn't your heir. It's not your legacy. It's not insurance for your empire. It's a child, Leah's child. And if you can't see the difference, then she's right to keep you away." "I know that," Damien said, and his voice cracked. "I know I fucked up, but I don't know how to fix it when she won't even talk to me." Gabriella studied him for a long moment. Then she did something unexpected. She hugged him. It was brief, awkward. They weren't a physically affectionate family, but her hand squeezed his shoulder with surprising strength. "Then you prove it," she said quietly. "Not with words, with actions. You want Leah to believe you've changed? Show her. And Damien?" She pulled back, met his eyes. "If you hurt that girl again, restraining order or not, I'll make what I did to your father look like mercy." She left him standing in his empty penthouse, her words echoing in the silence. The next morning, Damien canceled all his meetings and did something he should have done 3 months ago. He went hunting for the truth. Dr. Patricia Chen's office was in a sleek medical complex in Midtown, all glass and minimalist design and carefully curated plants. Damien walked past the receptionist without bothering to announce himself, found Chen's private office, and closed the door behind him before she could protest. "Mr. Viscari." She stood quickly, her expression shifting from surprise to wariness. "I don't have an appointment scheduled with you, and I should remind you that HIPAA regulations prevent me from discussing—" "You told my wife she could never have children." Damien's voice was quiet, controlled, deadly. "You staked your professional reputation on that diagnosis. And yet, 5 months after our divorce, Leah is pregnant. So either you're incompetent or you lied. Which is it?" Chen's face went pale. "The tests were conclusive. The scarring, the hormone levels." "Show me." Damien moved to her desk, gestured to her computer. "Pull up her file. Show me the tests you ran, the results you based your conclusive diagnosis on." "Mr. Viscari, I can't just... You can. And you will. Because if I find out you misdiagnosed my wife and destroyed my marriage through negligence or incompetence, I won't sue you. I won't file complaints with the medical board. I'll do something much worse." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper that made grown men confess buried sins. "I'll make sure every patient you've ever treated knows that Dr. Patricia Chen plays fast and loose with diagnoses that alter lives. I'll make sure your practice folds within 6 months. I'll make sure you spend the rest of your career wondering if you ever actually knew what you were doing." Chen's hands shook as she opened Leah's file on her computer. Damien moved around the desk, watched over her shoulder as she pulled up test results, ultrasound images, lab reports. And there, buried in the notes section of a hormone panel from 8 months ago, he found it. "Patient sample potentially compromised. Recommend retest." The note was dated 3 days before Chen had delivered her final diagnosis. 3 days before she told them never. "You knew," Damien said, his voice gone flat. "You knew the sample was compromised and you diagnosed her anyway." "It was a judgment call," Chen said quickly. The other tests showed scarring and structural abnormalities that made pregnancy difficult, not impossible. But you wanted to be certain, wanted to give us a clean answer, so you made an educated guess and sold it as fact." Damien's hands curled into fists. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" "Mr. Viscari, I'm sorry if the diagnosis caused distress, but medicine isn't an exact science. We make recommendations based on the best available—" "You didn't make a recommendation. You delivered a verdict. You told Leah she could never have children. Not probably not. Not extremely unlikely. Never." His voice was shaking now, rage and grief battling for dominance. "And when we asked about other options, you steered us toward adoption instead of suggesting a second opinion or retesting. Why?" Chen didn't answer, but her eyes flicked to a framed certificate on the wall, an award from a fertility clinic partnership program. Understanding hit Damien like cold water. "You get kickbacks," he said quietly, "from the adoption agencies, the surrogacy clinics. You tell desperate couples their options are limited, then conveniently refer them to facilities that pay you consultation fees. That's not... I would never... But her face said everything her mouth wouldn't. Damien pulled out his phone, took photos of the computer screen, the compromise sample note, the framed certificate. Then he looked at Chen with the kind of cold fury that had built empires and buried enemies. You have 24 hours to contact every patient you've diagnosed with infertility in the past 3 years and offer free retesting, he said quietly. You will personally oversee each case. You will not charge a single dollar. And if I find out you've cut corners or tried to bury this, I'll make sure the medical board knows exactly what Dr. Patricia Chen's professional judgment is worth. You can't... I can, and I will. Damien headed for the door, then paused. One more thing. You will never practice obstetrics again. You'll transfer your patients to competent physicians, you'll close your OB practice within 30 days, and you'll find a different specialty. Because women like Leah deserve doctors who care more about truth than commission checks. He left Chen sitting at her desk, her carefully constructed career crumbling around her, and felt nothing but cold satisfaction. It wasn't enough. Wouldn't undo the damage. Wouldn't bring back the 3 months he'd wasted or repair the trust he'd shattered. But it was a start. Damien spent the next week becoming an expert on prenatal care, high-risk pregnancies, and what a woman needed at 22 weeks. He read medical journals, consulted with 3 different obstetricians who had no idea they were advising a crime lord, learned about anatomy scans and glucose tests, and the difference between Braxton Hicks contractions and actual labor. He wasn't trying to insert himself into Leah's pregnancy. He was trying to understand what she was going through alone, what he should have been there for, what he'd abandoned her to face. Marcus found him in his study at 2 a.m, surrounded by pregnancy books and medical printouts, looking like he'd aged a decade in a week. "Boss," Marcus said carefully, "you've got the Castellano meeting at 8. You need sleep." "Cancel it." "Can't. They flew in from Chicago specifically for this. You blow them off. It sends the wrong message." Damien looked up, his eyes bloodshot. "Then it sends the wrong message. I don't care." Marcus studied him for a long moment. "This about Leah?" "Everything's about Leah." Damien rubbed his face. "I'm sitting here reading about fetal development and pregnancy complications, and all I can think is, she's been doing this alone for 5 months. Every doctor's appointment, every moment of fear, every time she felt the baby move for the first time. I wasn't there, and I can't..." His voice cracked. "I can't get that time back, Marcus." "No," Marcus agreed quietly. "You can't. But you can be there going forward, if she lets you." "She won't. She's got a restraining order. She told me to leave. She's protecting herself," Marcus interrupted. "Same way you protected your empire by divorcing her. Can't really blame her for using the tools available." Damien was quiet for a moment. Then, "How do I prove I've changed when I can't even talk to her?" Marcus pulled up a chair, sat down across from his boss with the kind of familiarity that came from 15 years of loyalty. "You know what I remember about you and Leah," Marcus said. "The way she looked at you during your wedding, like you hung the moon, like you were the answer to questions she didn't know how to ask." He paused. "And I remember thinking, that girl's going to get hurt, because you don't know how to let people in. You protect, you provide, you control, but you don't trust." "Not really." "I trusted her." "Did you?" Marcus leaned forward. "Because the moment things got hard, the moment you couldn't control the outcome, you ran. You dressed it up as duty and legacy and all that noble bullshit, but really, you were just scared. Scared that if you stayed and she couldn't give you what you needed, you'd resent her. Scared that love wouldn't be enough." The words hit too close to truth. "So what do I do?" Damien asked, and he hated how lost he sounded. "How do I prove I'm not that man anymore?" Marcus smiled slightly. "You stop trying to prove anything. You just be better. Show up, not for the baby, not for your legacy. For her, because she matters, because she's worth it. Because love isn't about what someone can give you, it's about what you're willing to give them." "She won't let me near her." "Then you respect that boundary. You don't push. Don't manipulate. Don't use your power to force your way back in." Marcus stood. "You want Leah back? You earn it. Slowly, carefully, by proving that you understand what you lost and why you lost it. And if she never forgives you, You live with that. Because that's what real love looks like, respecting her choice even when it destroys you. He left Damien alone with books about pregnancy and the uncomfortable realization that everything he'd learned about power and control was useless here. You couldn't negotiate with heartbreak, couldn't leverage your way back into someone's life, couldn't force someone to forgive you just because you'd finally understood what you'd thrown away. All you could do was change and hope it was enough. 3 days later, Damien received an envelope. It was delivered to his office by a law firm he didn't recognize, marked confidential in red letters. Inside was a single document, a paternity acknowledgement form, and a note written in Leah's elegant script. Since you asked, yes, it's yours. DNA test included for your legal peace of mind. I'm not interested in child support, custody negotiations, or your involvement, but you deserve to know the truth. The baby is due April 15th. A girl. That's all the information you're entitled to. Leah attached was a lab report from a prenatal paternity test, the kind done through Leah's blood work. Conclusive. Definitive. The baby was his. A girl. Damien read the note 3 times, his hands shaking. She'd given him everything he'd asked for: confirmation, medical proof, legal clarity. And in the same breath, she'd made it clear that none of it mattered. That biology didn't equal rights. That he'd forfeited his place in their daughter's life when he'd signed the divorce papers. The cruelty was that Leah was being completely reasonable. She wasn't keeping him away out of spite. She was protecting herself and their child from a man who'd proven that love was conditional. And Damien had no argument against that. No defense. No way to claim he deserved better. But that night, alone in his penthouse, he made a decision. He couldn't force Leah to let him in. Couldn't manipulate or negotiate or buy his way back into her life. But he could make sure that when their daughter was born, when she was old enough to ask questions about her father, Leah would have answers that didn't make him a monster. He could be better. Not for redemption, not for forgiveness, but because their daughter deserved a father who'd learned what mattered before she was old enough to be disappointed. So Damien started making changes. He established a trust fund in Leah's name, not as a bribe, but as security. Money she could access for medical bills, baby supplies, anything she needed without ever having to ask him for it. He made sure the paperwork was ironclad, no strings attached, managed by a neutral third party. He submitted himself to background checks for custody purposes, not because he was demanding custody, but because he wanted documentation proving he was stable, reliable, not a danger to their child. He started therapy. Real therapy, not the corporate counseling he'd done to check a box. He sat across from a woman named Dr. Reeves and talked about his father's death, his mother's expectations, the way power had become a substitute for connection. He dismantled the parts of his empire that operated in gray areas, not because it was strategic, but because he wanted to be someone his daughter could be proud of. He cut ties with contacts who dealt in human trafficking, shut down operations that profited from suffering, redirected resources toward legitimate businesses. His lieutenants thought he was having a breakdown. His mother called it finally growing up. Marcus just watched with quiet approval. And through it all, Damien kept his distance from Leah, respected the boundaries she'd set, didn't try to force contact or manipulate circumstances to bring them together. But he thought about her constantly, wondered if she was sleeping okay, if the baby was moving, if she was scared or excited or both, if she ever thought about him and felt anything besides justified anger. 6 weeks after receiving her note, Damien got a call from an unknown number. Mr. Vescari, this is Dr. Sarah Kim. I'm Leah's obstetrician. Damien's heart stopped. Is she okay? Is the baby... Everyone's fine, Dr. Kim said quickly. But I'm calling because Leah had a complication yesterday. Nothing serious, some spotting, probably from stress. But we've put her on modified bed rest for the next 2 weeks, and she's struggling. Struggling how? She lives alone, no family in the city. Her friends are helpful, but they have jobs, lives. She needs someone to help with groceries, cooking, making sure she's following medical orders. Someone to... Dr. Kim paused. She didn't want me to call you. Made me promise I wouldn't. But Mr. Vescari, she's 28 weeks pregnant, on bed rest, and trying to do everything herself because she's too proud to ask for help. And I'm worried. Damien was already grabbing his keys. What's her address? I can't give you that. HIPAA regulations? And also she'd kill me. But Dr. Kim's voice softened. There's a service that delivers prepared meals for people on bed rest. I could arrange it, put it under anonymous donor. She wouldn't have to know it was from you. Mate, it wasn't enough. Wasn't nearly enough. But it was something. Do it, Damien said. Whatever she needs, meals, medical supplies, anything. Send me the bill. There's one more thing, Dr. Kim said quietly. Her next ultrasound is in 3 days. The anatomy scan showed something the radiologist wants to follow up on. Probably nothing, but Leah's terrified. She asked if someone could come with her, and I know she doesn't have... She stopped. I'm overstepping. I know I am. But that woman is carrying your child alone, and she's scared, and maybe you don't deserve to be there. But the baby deserves a father who shows up. The line went dead. Damien stood in his office, phone in hand, his mind racing. He couldn't go. Leah had a restraining order, had told him explicitly to stay away. Showing up at her ultrasound would violate every boundary she'd set. But their daughter might be facing a medical complication, and Leah was terrified. And every instinct Damien had was screaming at him to do something. He called his lawyer. I need you to file a motion to modify the restraining order, Damien said, specifically for medical appointments related to the pregnancy. I'm not asking for custody or visitation, just the right to be present for our daughter's medical care. Damien, that's going to require Leah's consent or a court order, and given the circumstances, then we go to court. Tomorrow. I'll testify. I'll admit to every mistake I made. But I'm not sitting at home while my daughter might be facing health problems and Leah's going through it alone. The hearing was scheduled for the next morning. Damien showed up in a suit, no bodyguards, no intimidation tactics. Just him and a lawyer facing a judge who looked thoroughly unimpressed with the whole situation. Leah was there too, 7 months pregnant, dark circles under her eyes, wearing a loose dress, and the kind of exhaustion that went bone deep. Their eyes met across the courtroom, and Damien saw fear and fury, and something that might have been hope before she looked away. The judge reviewed the motion, reviewed the restraining order, then looked at both of them with the expression of someone who'd seen too many broken relationships parade through her courtroom. Mr. Viscari, she said, you have 3 minutes to explain why I should grant you access to medical appointments for a child whose mother has explicitly stated she wants nothing to do with you. Damien stood. He didn't have notes, didn't have a prepared statement, just truth that had been choking him for months. Your Honor, I don't deserve access. I don't deserve anything from Leah. I destroyed our marriage because I was a coward who chose certainty over love. When we received a medical diagnosis that said children were nearly impossible, I heard never and used it as permission to walk away. I told myself it was about duty and legacy, but really, I was just scared. Scared that if I stayed and we couldn't have children, I'd resent her. Scared that love wouldn't be enough. He could see Leah's hands clenched in her lap, her jaw tight. And then I found out the diagnosis was wrong, that Leah was pregnant, that everything I'd destroyed was built on a lie. Damien's voice cracked. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not even asking for a relationship. But our daughter... He had to stop, breathe. Our daughter might be facing medical complications, and Leah is terrified, and I know I have no right to be there. But if something's wrong, if our baby needs help, I want to be able to do something, even if it's just standing in a waiting room, even if Leah never speaks to me. I need to be there. The judge looked at Leah. Mrs. Arden, you have a response? Leah stood slowly, one hand on her belly. When she spoke, her voice was steady, but Damien could hear the tremor underneath. Your Honor, everything Mr. Viscari said is true. He did destroy our marriage. He did walk away. And when I found out I was pregnant, I made a choice to protect myself and my baby from a man who'd proven that love comes with conditions. She paused. But I've also spent the last month watching him change. I've seen the trust fund he established, the background checks he submitted, the therapy appointments, the way he's restructured his business to be something our daughter wouldn't be ashamed of. Damien's breath caught. She'd been watching, paying attention, seeing his attempts to be better even when he thought she'd shut him out completely. I don't forgive him, Leah continued. I don't know if I ever will, but... Her voice broke. But our baby deserves a father who shows up. And if he's willing to do that, willing to respect my boundaries and my choices, then she looked directly at Damien for the first time. Then yes, he can come to the ultrasound, just that, nothing more. The judge granted the modification, limited access to prenatal appointments only, no contact outside medical facilities, no communication unless Leah initiated it. It was the smallest victory imaginable, and it felt like Damien had been given back the world. The ultrasound was scheduled for 2 in the afternoon at a private medical facility on the Upper East Side. Damien arrived 15 minutes early, not because he was anxious, though he was, but because showing up late would have been disrespectful, and he'd already disrespected Leah enough for a lifetime. He waited in the lobby, a sleek space with abstract art and soft music designed to make nervous parents feel calm. It didn't work. Damien sat in an uncomfortable modern chair, his hands clasped between his knees, watching the door like it might tell him something about the future. Leah arrived exactly on time. She always had been punctual, one of the 1,000 small things he'd loved about her, and never thought to mention until it was too late to matter. She was wearing a soft gray sweater that draped over her belly, dark jeans, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She looked beautiful and exhausted and so fragile that Damien wanted to wrap her in steel. Their eyes met across the lobby. Leah's expression was carefully neutral, giving him nothing. She walked to the reception desk, signed in, then took a seat 3 chairs away from him, close enough to acknowledge his presence, far enough to make the distance clear. They sat in silence. Damien wanted to say something, apologize again, ask how she was feeling, make some kind of connection, but the words stuck in his throat. What could he say that wouldn't sound hollow? What comfort could he offer when he was the reason she needed comforting? Mrs. Arden? A nurse appeared in the doorway, clipboard in hand, professional smile in place. We're ready for you. Leah stood. So did Damien. The nurse's smile flickered with confusion, her eyes moving between them like she was trying to solve a puzzle. Leah paused, and Damien could see her choosing words carefully. He's the father. He has court permission to attend. The nurse's expression shifted to understanding, then sympathy. She'd clearly seen her share of complicated family situations. Of course, follow me, please. They walked down a hallway lined with photos of smiling babies, proud parents, families that looked nothing like whatever broken thing Damien and Leah had become. The exam room was small, dimly lit, dominated by an ultrasound machine that looked like something from a spaceship. If you'll have a seat on the table, Mrs. Arden, the nurse said, gesturing to the examination table covered in sterile paper. And Dad can sit here. She indicated a chair positioned near Leah's head, close enough to see the screen but not so close as to invade space. Leah settled onto the table with the careful movements of someone carrying precious cargo. The nurse draped a paper sheet across her lap, then helped her lift her sweater to expose her belly. Damien had seen Leah's body before, had mapped every inch of it, knew it better than his own. But seeing the taut swell of her abdomen now, knowing their daughter was growing inside, made his chest tight with something that felt too big for his ribs. Dr. Kim will be right in, the nurse said, dimming the lights further before slipping out. And then they were alone. The silence stretched between them like a living thing. Damien could hear Leah breathing, hear the soft hum of medical equipment, hear his own heartbeat loud in his ears. Thank you, he said finally, his voice quiet, for letting me be here. Leah didn't look at him, just stared at the ceiling, her hands resting on either side of her belly. I'm not doing it for you. I know. I'm doing it because Dr. Kim said the baby might have a heart murmur, and if she does, if she needs surgery or... Leah's voice cracked. If something's wrong, I didn't want to face it alone, and I didn't want to call my friends and scare them when it might be nothing. The confession hurt more than anger would have, because it meant Leah was so alone, so isolated in her fear, that even the man who'd destroyed her was better than no one. What did Dr. Kim say exactly? Damien asked carefully. That the radiologist saw something on the last ultrasound, an irregularity in the heart chambers. Could be normal variation, could be a septal defect, could be... She pressed her lips together. She said not to panic until we know more. But how do you not panic when they tell you your baby's heart might not be right? Damien's hands curled into fists. He wanted to touch her, to offer some kind of physical comfort, but he knew better. Whatever it is, we'll handle it, The best doctors, the best care, whatever she needs. I'll handle it, Leah corrected, her voice sharp. You don't get to we anymore, Damien. You gave up that privilege when you signed the divorce papers. Before he could respond, Dr. Kim entered, her expression warm and professional. She was younger than Damien expected, maybe mid-30s, with kind eyes and the kind of calm that came from delivering both good and bad news with equal grace. Leah, Mr. Viscari. She nodded to each of them, then settled onto a rolling stool beside the ultrasound machine. How are we feeling today? Terrified, Leah said bluntly. That's understandable, but let's see what we're working with before we borrow trouble, okay? Dr. Kim squeezed gel onto Leah's belly, then picked up the ultrasound wand. This might be cold. The screen flickered to life, showing gray and white shadows that slowly resolved into shapes. Damien had no idea what he was looking at. It looked like a Rorschach test designed by someone on hallucinogens, but Doctor, Kim was nodding, moving the wand carefully across Leah's belly. There she is, Dr. Kim said softly, and suddenly the chaos resolved into something recognizable. A profile. A tiny nose. Fingers curled near a face. Beautiful position. Let me get some measurements. Damien couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only stare at the screen showing his daughter, their daughter, moving gently in the dark safety of Leah's womb. She was real, not an abstract concept or a source of conflict, but a person. Small and fragile and completely dependent on the woman he'd abandoned. Is her heart okay? Leah's voice was tight with fear. Dr. Kim moved the wand, adjusted the angle, and the image shifted to show a rapidly fluttering rhythm. Let's take a look. There's the four-chamber view, and there, she pointed to the screen, where Damien could see what looked like 4 distinct spaces, all pulsing in synchronization. That's what we want to see. 4 chambers, all functioning beautifully. The irregularity the radiologist noted appears to have resolved. It was likely just the baby's position during the last scan making the image unclear. Leah made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. Her hands flew to her face, covering her eyes as her whole body shook with relief. So she's okay? Damien asked, his own voice rough. Her heart is fine? Her heart is perfect, Dr. Kim confirmed, smiling. Strong, healthy, exactly what we want to see at 28 weeks. Everything else looks good too. Growth is right on track, fluid levels are excellent, placenta is functioning well. You've got a very healthy baby girl in there, Leah. Leah was crying now, quiet tears streaming down her face. Damien's hand moved without conscious thought, reaching for hers. Their fingers touched for just a moment, barely a second, before Leah pulled away, wiping her face with shaking hands. Can you tell her weight? Leah asked, her voice steadier now. Let me get some measurements. Dr. Kim moved the wand again, clicking keys on the machine, taking readings. Based on her femur length and abdominal circumference, I'd estimate she's about 2.5 pounds right now, right where she should be. 2.5 pounds. Damien tried to imagine something that small, that light, and couldn't. She was barely bigger than a bag of sugar, and yet she had fingers and toes, and a heart that beat strong enough to show up on a screen. Do you want prints? Dr. Kim asked, glancing between them. I can give you both copies. Leah looked at Damien, her expression unreadable. Then she nodded once. Yes, please. Dr. Kim printed several images, profile shots, the 4-chamber heart view, a perfect picture of a tiny hand with all 5 fingers visible. She handed half to Leah, half to Damien. Everything looks excellent, Dr. Kim said as she cleaned the gel off Leah's belly. Keep up with the modified bed rest for another week, then we can reassess. Your blood pressure is a little elevated, which isn't surprising given the stress, but we'll keep an eye on it. Any questions? Leah shook her head, still staring at the ultrasound photos in her hands like they might disappear. Mr. Viscari? Dr. Kim turned to him. Damien had 1,000 questions. About what Leah should eat, what was safe, what signs meant emergency, how to tell if the baby was in distress. But asking them would mean admitting how little he knew, how absent he'd been, how desperately he wanted to be involved in a life he'd forfeited the right to share. Just one, he said quietly. Is there anything I can do to help? Anything Leah needs that I can provide? Dr. Kim looked at Leah, clearly deferring to her. Leah's jaw tightened. I don't need anything from you, she said. The bed rest, Dr. Kim interjected gently. Leah, you're still on modified restrictions. You need help with meals, groceries, basic household tasks. I know you've been managing, but I'm fine, Leah insisted. You're exhausted, Dr. Kim countered, her voice kind but firm. And stress isn't good for your blood pressure. If Mr. Vescari is offering support, he's not offering support. He's offering money. It's not the same thing. Leah sat up, pulled her sweater down, her movements sharp with frustration. I appreciate the concern, Doctor. Kim, but I've been handling this alone for 7 months. I can handle another 3. She slid off the table, grabbed her purse, and walked out of the exam room without looking at Damien. He started to follow, but Dr. Kim's hand on his arm stopped him. Give her a minute, she said quietly. That was a lot of fear for one afternoon. She needs to process. She won't let me help. Can you blame her? Dr. Kim's expression was sympathetic but direct. You proved that your support comes with conditions. That when things get hard, you leave. She's protecting herself and her baby. That's not spite, Mr. Viscari. That's survival. The words landed like punches. Because they were true. Because Damien had done exactly that. Proven that his love had limits, that his commitment came with fine print, that Leah couldn't count on him when it mattered. How do I fix it? He asked, and he sounded lost even to his own ears. Dr. Kim smiled sadly. You don't fix it. You just keep showing up, keep being present, keep proving that you've changed. And maybe, eventually she'll believe you. But Damien? She looked at him seriously. If you're doing this to ease your guilt or because you want absolution, don't. That's not fair to her or the baby. You show up because it's the right thing to do, even if Leah never forgives you. Even if you never get what you want. Can you do that? Damien looked down at the ultrasound photos in his hand, at the profile of a daughter who didn't know him, who might never know him, who existed because of a miracle and a misdiagnosis, and 2 people who'd loved each other badly. Yes, he said. I can do that. He found Leah in the parking garage, standing beside her car, a sensible sedan, nothing like the luxury vehicles she'd driven as his wife, with her forehead resting against the driver's side window. Her shoulders were shaking. She was crying, trying to hide it, trying to hold herself together the way she'd had to for months. Damien stopped 10 feet away, close enough that she'd know he was there, far enough to respect the boundaries she'd drawn. Leah? She didn't turn around. Go away, Damien. I will, in a minute, but first, I need to say something. I don't want to hear, I know, but I need you to hear it anyway. He took a careful breath. I'm not here because I want custody, or because I think biology gives me rights, or because I'm trying to manipulate my way back into your life. I'm here because our daughter deserves better than the father I've been. And whether you forgive me or not, whether you let me be part of her life or not, I'm going to be better. I'm going to show up. I'm going to make sure that when she's old enough to ask about me, you can tell her something other than he left. Leah turned then, her face wet with tears, her expression raw. You think that makes it okay? You think showing up to one ultrasound erases what you did? No, nothing erases it. Nothing makes it okay. Damien's voice cracked. But I'm not asking for forgiveness, Leah. I'm asking for the chance to be the father our daughter deserves, even if I never get to be anything to you again. She stared at him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face like she was looking for lies, for manipulation, for the angle. Then she wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly looking smaller than he'd ever seen her. I was so scared, she whispered. When Dr. Kim said there might be something wrong with her heart, I was terrified, and I didn't know who to call. My friends are wonderful, but they don't understand. They haven't been through this. And you were the only person who would care as much as I do, who would be as scared as I was. And I hated that, hated needing you, hated that even after everything, you're still the person I think of when I'm falling apart. The confession broke something in Damien's chest. I'm sorry. I'm so fucking sorry, Leah, for all of it, for leaving, for making you feel like you had to do this alone, for... Stop. Her voice was sharp. I don't want apologies. I want... She paused, pressing her hands to her belly. I want to believe you've changed, but I don't know how to trust you again. Every time I think about letting you in, I remember the way you looked at me in that doctor's office. Like I'd failed you, like I wasn't enough. You were always enough, Damien said, his voice breaking. You were everything. I was just too much of a coward to see it. Then prove it. Leah met his eyes, her expression fierce despite the tears. Not with money, not with grand gestures. Prove it by showing up, by being consistent, by respecting my boundaries even when it's hard, by being the man I thought I married instead of the one who left. I will, Damien promised, however long it takes, whatever you need. Leah nodded slowly, then opened her car door. I have another appointment in 2 weeks, the glucose test. Dr. Kim wants to monitor my blood sugar because of the bed rest. She looked at him. You can come, if you want. It was the smallest olive branch imaginable, and it felt like being handed the moon. I'll be there, Damien said. Leah got in her car, started the engine, then rolled down the window. Damien? Her voice was softer now, almost tentative. She really is okay. Her heart? Perfect, Damien said, and his smile felt like the first real thing he'd done in months. Dr. Kim said perfect. Leah's expression crumpled with relief. Then she rolled up the window and drove away, leaving Damien standing in the parking garage with ultrasound photos in his hand and hope, fragile, terrifying hope, beginning to take root in his chest. The next 2 weeks were an exercise in restraint. Damien wanted to call Leah, to check in, to make sure she was following the bed rest orders and eating properly and not stressing about things that would spike her blood pressure. But he didn't, because calling would be crossing a boundary, and he'd promised to respect the limits she'd set. Instead, he channeled his energy into preparation. He read everything he could find about glucose testing, gestational diabetes, third trimester complications. He consulted with nutritionists about meal plans for pregnant women on bed rest. He researched the best pediatric cardiologists in the city, just in case the heart murmur came back or something else developed. He was becoming an expert on a pregnancy he wasn't part of, preparing for a future he might never get to share. Marcus found him in the gym at 6 a.m, beating the hell out of a heavy bag like it had personally wronged him. You keep that up, you're going to break your hands before the baby gets here, Marcus observed, leaning against the door frame. Damien landed one more punch, then stepped back, breathing hard. Can't sleep. Yeah, I noticed. You've been running on about 4 hours a night for weeks. Marcus tossed him a towel. What's eating you? Everything? Damien wiped his face, his hands still wrapped in tape and leather. Leah's due in less than 3 months, and I don't know if I'll be in the delivery room or finding out I have a daughter through a text message. I don't know if she'll let me help or if I'm going to spend the rest of my life watching my kid grow up from a distance. I don't know if... He stopped, pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes. I don't know if I can do this, Marcus. Be patient. Wait. Hope that eventually Leah might let me be a father. You don't have a choice, Marcus said bluntly. You fucked up. Now you live with the consequences. And those consequences include not knowing, not controlling, not having any certainty about what comes next. That's not helpful. It's not supposed to be helpful. It's supposed to be true. Marcus pulled up a bench, sat down. You know what your problem is, boss? You're used to winning. Used to getting what you want through strategy and leverage and force of will. But this isn't a negotiation. It's not a business deal. It's a relationship with a woman you hurt and a kid you haven't met. And the only way through is to be patient and consistent and to accept that you might not get what you want. And if Leah never forgives me, then you still show up for your daughter. You still be a good father. You still prove that you're more than the man who left. Marcus stood. This isn't about winning Leah back, Damien. This is about being the person your kid deserves. Everything else is secondary. The words settled over Damien like a weight. Because Marcus was right. He'd been so focused on proving himself to Leah, on earning back what he'd lost, that he'd forgotten the actual point. His daughter. Who would be here in less than 3 months? Who would need a father, whether Leah forgave him or not? That night, Damien started writing letters. He didn't know if he'd ever give them to his daughter. Didn't know if Leah would let him be part of her life enough for letters to matter. But he wrote them anyway. Letters about who he was, who he'd been, what he'd learned. Letters about her mother, how strong Leah was, how brave, how she'd carried their daughter alone and never complained. Letters about his mistakes, his regrets, the ways he'd failed before she was even born. He wrote about love, about how he'd thought it was something you earned through achievement and utility, something that came with conditions. About how Leah had taught him that real love was messy and unconditional and sometimes meant showing up even when you didn't get what you wanted. He wrote about legacy, about how he'd built an empire thinking it would give him immortality, only to realize that the only legacy that mattered was the kind you left in the people who came after you. He wrote until his hands cramped, filling a leather journal with words his daughter might never read. But writing them felt like preparation, like becoming someone who deserved to be called a father. Check. The glucose test appointment was at 10 on a Tuesday morning. Damien arrived at 9:45, early enough to be respectful, but not so early as to seem desperate. He found Leah in the waiting room, drinking what looked like flat orange soda from a plastic bottle. "That's disgusting," she said when she saw him looking. "They make you drink 100 grams of sugar, then test your blood after an hour to see how your body processes it. It tastes like someone dissolved candy corn in battery acid." Damien sat down 2 chairs away, the same careful distance they'd maintained at the last appointment. "How are you feeling?" "Like I'm about to vibrate out of my skin from the sugar rush. Also nauseous. Also exhausted because your daughter decided 3 a.m. was a great time to practice gymnastics." But she said it with a small smile, her hand resting on her belly. "How are you?" It was the first time she'd asked, the first time she'd initiated conversation beyond logistics and boundaries. Damien felt something loosen in his chest. Terrified, he admitted. Reading too much, sleeping too little, trying to figure out how to be a good father when I don't have a roadmap. Leah studied him for a moment. "You've been going to therapy." It wasn't a question. Damien wondered how she knew, then remembered that Leah had always been observant, always picking up on details other people missed. "Twice a week," he confirmed. "Dr. Reeves. She specializes in attachment issues and childhood trauma." "Is it helping?" "It's making me realize how much I don't know about myself. How much of my identity was wrapped up in control and power and never showing weakness." He paused. "She says I use empire building as a substitute for actual connection. That I learned early that people leave, so I made myself indispensable instead of vulnerable." Leah was quiet for a moment. "Your father died when you were 12. 13. Car accident." Damien's voice was flat, the way it always was when he talked about Antonio Viscari. "One day he was there, the next he was gone. And my mother, she didn't have time to grieve. She had to hold the empire together, keep the vultures from taking everything we'd built. So I learned that emotion was a luxury, that survival meant being strong." "I'm sorry," Leah said quietly. "I knew he died young, but you never talked about it. About him. Talking about it meant feeling it. And feeling it meant—" Damien stopped, pressed his lips together. "I'm learning that avoiding pain doesn't make it go away. It just makes it come out sideways. In divorces and bad decisions and pushing away the people who matter." Before Leah could respond, the nurse called her name. They went back together, through the now familiar hallway to an exam room where a phlebotomist waited with supplies. "Mrs. Arden," the phlebotomist said cheerfully. "How are we doing today? Ready for the blood draw?" "As ready as I'll ever be," Leah said, settling into the chair. She held out her arm, looked away as the phlebotomist tied the tourniquet and swabbed her inner elbow. Damien saw her flinch when the needle went in, saw her hand curl into a fist. Without thinking, he reached over and took her other hand. Leah's fingers tightened around his, holding on like he was an anchor. The phlebotomist filled 3 vials, labeled them efficiently, then pressed gauze to Leah's arm. "All done. Keep pressure on that for a few minutes. Dr. Kim will have your results in about 15 minutes." They sat in the exam room waiting, Leah still holding Damien's hand like she'd forgotten to let go. The silence wasn't comfortable exactly, but it wasn't hostile either. Just 2 people waiting for news about a baby they'd made in better times. "I've been thinking about names," Leah said suddenly. "For the baby." Damien's heart kicked. "Yeah? I like Elena. It was my grandmother's name. She died when I was 8, but I remember her as the kindest person I ever knew. Strong, but gentle. She used to tell me that being soft wasn't the same as being weak." "Elena," Damien repeated, testing it out. "Elena Viscari." "Elena Arden," Leah corrected sharply, then softer. "Or maybe Elena Arden Viscari, I haven't decided." But the hyphen felt like a gift, like Leah acknowledging that their daughter belonged to both of them, even if they didn't belong to each other anymore. "I think it's perfect," Damien said. Your grandmother would be honored. Leah smiled, small but real. She would have liked you. If you'd met before, she stopped, the sentence hanging unfinished. Before you left, before we fell apart, before everything went wrong. Dr. Kim knocked once, then entered with a tablet in hand. Good news. Your glucose levels are completely normal. No signs of gestational diabetes. You can go back to regular eating, though I'd still recommend keeping an eye on refined sugars and staying hydrated. So the bed rest can end? Leah asked hopefully. Another week, just to be safe. Your blood pressure is still a little elevated, and I want to make sure we're out of the woods before you go back to normal activity. But you're doing great, Leah. Baby's doing great. We're right on track for a healthy delivery. Relief flooded Leah's face. Thank you. Thank you so much. After Dr. Kim left, they walked out together. Leah moving slowly in the careful way of women in their third trimester. When they reached the parking garage, Damien stopped. Can I ask you something? He said. Leah turned, wary. What? When you're cleared from bed rest, when things settle down, would you let me take you to dinner? Not a date. Just two people trying to figure out how to co-parent, trying to build something functional out of the wreckage we made. Leah was quiet for a long time, studying his face like she was weighing truth against history. One dinner, she said finally. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere we can talk without the whole city watching. And Damien? Her eyes were serious. If you try to turn it into more than co-parenting, if you push or manipulate or try to leverage this into something I'm not ready for, I walk. And I don't give you another chance. Are we clear? Crystal, Damien said and meant it. Okay. Leah took a breath. Then yes, one dinner, after the bed rest ends, after I can sit through a meal without feeling like I'm about to fall apart. She got in her car and drove away, leaving Damien standing in the dim parking garage with hope burning bright enough to hurt. One dinner, one chance to prove he'd changed, one opportunity to show Leah that the man who'd left wasn't the man he was anymore. He couldn't afford to waste it. The dinner was scheduled for a Saturday evening, 2 weeks after Leah's bed rest officially ended. Damien chose a small Italian restaurant in Brooklyn, far from the Manhattan circles where his name carried weight and whispers. The kind of place with checkered tablecloths and family recipes that had been passed down through generations, where the owner knew everyone's name and treated diners like guests in his home. Damien arrived 20 minutes early, checked the private corner table he'd reserved, made sure the lighting was soft and the noise level low enough for conversation. He was wearing dark slacks and a gray sweater, no suit, no tie, trying to look like a man instead of an empire. His hands were shaking. He couldn't remember the last time he'd been this nervous. Leah arrived exactly on time, and the sight of her made Damien's breath catch. She was 8 months pregnant now, her belly prominent and beautiful beneath a deep blue dress that draped elegantly over her curves. Her hair was down, falling in soft waves around her shoulders. She looked radiant and exhausted, and so achingly familiar that Damien felt the loss of her all over again. He stood when she approached, pulled out her chair, waited until she was settled before taking his own seat across from her. Thank you for coming, he said quietly. Thank you for picking somewhere I could actually fit into a booth, Leah replied with a small smile, gesturing to her belly. I'm at the stage where restaurant seating is a legitimate concern. The owner appeared immediately, an older man named Paolo, who greeted them with genuine warmth and no recognition. He brought water, bread, a small dish of olive oil infused with herbs. Leah tore off a piece of bread, dipped it, ate it with an expression of pure relief. I've been craving carbs for weeks, she admitted. Dr. Kim said my glucose levels are fine, so I'm allowed to enjoy bread again without guilt. They ordered simply. Leah chose pasta with a light marinara sauce, easy on her increasingly finicky stomach. Damien ordered the same, not because he wanted it, but because matching her felt safer than making independent choices. When Paolo disappeared into the kitchen, silence settled over their table. Not hostile, but weighted with everything they weren't saying. I don't know how to do this, Leah said finally, her hands wrapped around her water glass. How to sit across from you and pretend we're just two people discussing co-parenting when I can't stop remembering what we were. Then don't pretend, Damien said. Tell me what you're really thinking, what you really feel. I can handle your anger, Leah. I can't handle the walls. She looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she took a breath and spoke with brutal honesty. "I'm furious with you," she said quietly. "Every day. Every time I struggle to put on my shoes or get up from a chair or sleep through the night because your daughter is using my ribs as a jungle gym, I remember that I'm doing this alone because you walked away, and it makes me so angry I can barely breathe." Damien forced himself to hold her gaze, to not look away or defend or explain, just to listen. "But I'm also furious with myself," Leah continued, her voice cracking, "because I see you at these appointments, and I see you trying, and part of me wants to believe you've changed, wants to let you in. And I hate that part of me. I hate that after everything, I still—" She stopped, pressed her lips together. "I hate that it's not as simple as just hating you." "I don't want you to stop hating me," Damien said carefully. "I deserve your anger. I deserve every bit of rage you're feeling. But Leah, I need you to know, the man who left you in that exam room, I'm not him anymore. I can't be. Because he was a coward who chose fear over love, and I refuse to be that person when our daughter gets here." "Words are easy, Damien. You've always been good with words." "Then forget the words. Look at what I've done." Damien leaned forward. "I didn't contest the restraining order. I didn't use my power to force my way into your life. I respected every boundary you set, even when it killed me. I restructured my business, cut ties with operations I should have walked away from years ago. I established a trust in your name with no strings attached. I started therapy. I showed up to every appointment you allowed, and I've been writing letters to Elena, letters I might never give her, because I needed to figure out who I am beyond empire and control." Leah's eyes were wet. "You've been writing her letters?" "Every night. About her mother. About my mistakes. About what I hope her life will be." Damien's voice roughened. "About how love isn't ownership. How being a father isn't about legacy or succession, but about showing up, about being steady, about loving someone even when they can't love you back." "Damien, I'm not asking for forgiveness," he interrupted gently. "I'm not asking you to forget what I did or trust me like you did before. I'm just asking you to let me prove that change is real, that the man sitting across from you now is the one I should have been all along." Their food arrived, steam rising from plates of perfectly cooked pasta. Leah picked up her fork, twirled it absently through the noodles, but didn't eat, just stared at her plate like it might hold answers. "The night you left," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper, "I sat in our bedroom and tried to understand what I'd done wrong, what I could have done differently. If I'd been prettier, smarter, more interesting, maybe you would have stayed. Maybe I would have been enough." Damien felt like she'd reached across the table and carved out his heart. "Leah, I know now that wasn't true. That your leaving was about you, not me. But that knowledge doesn't erase the months I spent feeling worthless, feeling like I'd failed at the one thing that mattered in your world." She looked up, met his eyes. "You broke something in me, Damien, and I've spent 7 months trying to put myself back together, trying to become someone who doesn't need validation from a man who proved love comes with conditions." "I'm sorry," Damien said, and his voice cracked. "I'm so fucking sorry. I can't fix what I broke, can't undo the damage. But I swear to you, Leah, I will spend the rest of my life making sure Elena never feels the way I made you feel, never questions her worth, never thinks love is something she has to earn." Leah's hands shook as she set down her fork. "That's what scares me most. Not that you'll be a bad father, but that you'll be a good one. That Elena will love you the way I did, and that one day, when things get hard or she disappoints you or she doesn't fit into the life you've planned, you'll leave her too." The fear in her voice gutted him, because it wasn't irrational, wasn't unfounded. He'd given her every reason to believe that his love came with escape clauses. "Then watch me," Damien said, leaning forward. "For the next 3 months, 6 months, year, however long it takes. Watch me show up. Watch me be consistent. Watch me prove that the pattern you're afraid of isn't who I am anymore. And if I ever give you reason to think I'm going to hurt Elena, you cut me out. Completely. No second chances, no explanations. You protect our daughter the way you've been protecting her since the moment you found out you were pregnant." Leah wiped her eyes with shaking hands. "I want to believe you, so badly. But belief isn't something I can force. It has to be earned. And Damien, you're starting from so far in the negative that I don't know if there's enough time or effort in the world to balance the scale." Then I'll keep trying, Damien said simply, for as long as it takes. They ate in silence for a while, both of them pushing food around their plates more than actually eating. The restaurant hummed with the sounds of other diners, other conversations, other people whose lives hadn't imploded under the weight of medical misdiagnoses and failed marriages. Tell me about the therapy, Leah said eventually. What have you been working on? Damien set down his fork, grateful for the shift in conversation. Doctor. Reeves says I have anxious attachment patterns rooted in my father's death, that I learned early that people leave, so I developed strategies to protect myself. Building an empire where I was indispensable, creating relationships based on utility rather than vulnerability, maintaining control so I'd never be blindsided again. That makes sense, Leah said quietly. You always needed to know where I was, who I was with, what I was doing. I thought it was protectiveness, but it was fear, Damien admitted. Fear that if I didn't monitor everything, you'd slip away. And the ironic thing is, by trying so hard to prevent loss, I created it. I pushed you away by refusing to be vulnerable, by making our relationship transactional. What does Dr. Reeves say about that? That I need to learn to sit with uncertainty, to accept that love means risk, that there are no guarantees and trying to create them through control just destroys the thing I'm trying to protect. He paused. She also says I need to grieve, for my father, for our marriage, for the version of myself that thought power was enough. Leah reached across the table then, her hand covering his. It was the first time she'd initiated touch since the elevator confrontation, and Damien felt the contact like electricity. I'm proud of you, she said softly, for doing the work, for being willing to look at the ugly parts and not run away. I ran once, Damien said, turning his hand to lace his fingers through hers. I'm not running again, no matter how hard it gets. They stayed like that for a moment, hands joined across the table, two people who'd loved each other badly, trying to figure out if there was a path forward that didn't involve more destruction. Paolo returned to clear their plates, offered dessert. Leah declined, too full, too tired. Damien paid the check, left a generous tip, then walked Leah out to where her car was parked on the street. The night air was cold, early March still clinging to winter. Leah wrapped her coat tighter around herself, her breath misting in the streetlight. Thank you for tonight, she said, for being honest, for not trying to charm your way past my defenses. I meant every word. I know. That's what makes it so hard. She looked up at him, her expression torn. I want to hate you, Damien. It would be so much easier if I could just hate you and move on. But you keep showing up and being real and making me remember why I fell in love with you in the first place. Damien's chest tightened. Leah, don't. Don't say anything. Don't promise me anything. Just keep being who you were tonight. Keep being honest. Keep showing up. And maybe eventually I'll figure out if there's a version of us that works. She stood on her toes, pressed a soft kiss to his cheek, then got in her car before he could respond. Damien watched her drive away, his hand pressed to where her lips had touched his skin, hope and terror warring in his chest. But the next month passed in a careful dance. Damien continued attending appointments, the 32-week checkup, the 34-week ultrasound, the 36-week non-stress test where they monitored Elena's heartbeat and movement patterns. Each time, Leah was a little less guarded, a little more willing to share small details about her day, her thoughts, her fears about impending motherhood. She told him about the nursery she'd set up in her brownstone, decorated in soft grays and whites with pops of pale yellow. About the prenatal classes she'd taken alone, learning breathing techniques and labor positions while surrounded by couples who had partners to practice with. She told him about the moments of panic when she woke up at 3 in the morning and couldn't feel Elena moving, the terror that gripped her until their daughter shifted and kicked and reminded Leah that she was fine, just sleeping. She told him about her friends who'd thrown her a baby shower, who'd shown up with gifts and support and practical advice about breast pumps and diaper genies and how to survive on 3 hours of sleep. And slowly, carefully, Damien started to share too. He told her about the nursery he'd set up in his penthouse, the one Leah might never see but that existed anyway, because he needed a physical space to hold his hope. About the parenting books he'd read, the online forums he'd joined where new fathers shared fears and failures and hard-won wisdom. He told her about calling his mother and having an actual conversation for the first time in years. About admitting he'd been wrong, that he'd let fear drive decisions, that he needed to learn how to be a father from someone who'd survived single parenthood in a world designed to destroy women like her. He told her about the nightmares he had where Elena was born and Leah wouldn't let him hold her, where he stood outside hospital windows watching his daughter grow up behind glass, forever close but unreachable. "That's not going to happen," Leah said quietly after he'd confessed that particular fear. They were sitting in Dr. Kim's waiting room before the 37-week appointment, and Leah's hand found his without hesitation. "When Elena's born, you'll be there, if you want to be. I won't keep her from you, Damien. I won't let my anger make our daughter pay the price." Relief crashed through him. "You mean that?" "I do, but—" She squeezed his hand. "But you need to understand that being there doesn't mean we're together, doesn't mean we're fixing our marriage or trying again or anything beyond co-parenting. Can you handle that?" It felt like being offered water in a desert and being told he could only have a sip. But Damien nodded, because a sip was better than dying of thirst. "I can handle that," he said. At the 37-week appointment, Dr. Kim examined Leah with her usual thorough efficiency, then sat back with a smile. "You're at 2 centimeters dilated," she announced. 50% effaced. Baby's head is engaged. Everything's looking good for a full-term delivery." "How long?" Leah asked, her eyes wide. "Could be days, could be weeks. First babies like to keep us guessing." Dr. Kim looked between them. "Do you have your hospital bags packed, birth plan finalized, support person identified?" Leah glanced at Damien. "I've been planning to go alone. Call my friend Rachel when labor starts and have her meet me there." "Alone?" Dr. Kim's eyebrows rose. "Leah, labor can last 12, 18, 24 hours for first-time mothers. You're going to want someone there, someone to advocate for you, help you through contractions, make sure your wishes are respected." "Rachel will—" "I'll be there," Damien said quietly. "If you'll let me. Not as your husband. Not as anything except someone who cares about you and wants to make sure you're not going through the hardest thing you've ever done by yourself." Leah's eyes filled with tears. "Damien, I don't know if I can have you in the delivery room. If I can be that vulnerable with you. If I can—" "Then I'll wait outside," he said simply. "In the waiting room, in the hallway, wherever you need me to be. But I'll be there. Because you shouldn't have to do this alone, and because I want to meet our daughter the moment she's ready to meet the world." Dr. Kim discreetly busied herself with paperwork while Leah cried quietly, her hands pressed to her face. When she finally looked up, her expression was raw but resolved. "Okay," she whispered. "You can be there. But if at any point I say I need you to leave, you leave. No arguments, no trying to convince me otherwise. You respect what I need in that moment." "Absolutely," Damien agreed. "Whatever you need." They left the appointment with instructions to watch for signs of labor and an understanding that the next time they saw each other, their lives would be irrevocably changed. Bennett. The call came at 2:30 in the morning on a Tuesday, 3 days after the 37-week appointment. Damien was awake. He'd been sleeping poorly, his phone on the nightstand set to maximum volume just in case. When it rang, he answered before the second ring. "Damien?" Leah's voice was tight with pain and fear. "My water broke. Contractions started about 20 minutes ago. They're 7 minutes apart. Dr. Kim said to head to the hospital when they hit 5 minutes. Damien was already out of bed, pulling on clothes with shaking hands. "Where are you? I'm coming to get you." "I'm at home. But Damien, I don't think we have time to wait. The contractions are getting closer fast. 3 minutes now. I need to—" She gasped, the sound sharp and breathless. "I need to get to the hospital. I'm 10 minutes from you. Do not leave without me. Can you walk?" "I think so. I packed the hospital bag yesterday. It's by the door." "Good. That's good. I'm getting in the car now. Stay on the phone with me, okay? Just breathe through the contractions. I'll be there before you know it." He drove like a man possessed, phone on speaker, listening to Leah breathe through contractions that were coming harder and faster than they should for early labor. He broke every traffic law, ran 2 red lights, didn't care about anything except getting to her before she had to face this alone. He made it in 8 minutes. Leah was standing in her doorway when he pulled up, one hand braced against the frame, the other pressed to her belly. Her face was pale, sheened with sweat, her eyes wide with pain and fear. Damien was out of the car before the engine stopped, running to her side. "I've got you," he said, wrapping an arm around her waist. "Lean on me. Where's the bag?" "Inside by the—" She gasped as another contraction hit, her whole body tensing. Damien counted silently, 60 seconds. When it passed, Leah sagged against him, breathing hard. "They're really close, 2 minutes apart. Is that normal?" "I don't know, but we're getting you to the hospital right now." He grabbed the bag, helped Leah to the car, got her settled in the passenger seat. Then he called Dr. Kim's emergency line, put it on speaker as he drove. "Dr. Kim, this is Damien Viscari. Leah's in labor. Water broke about 40 minutes ago. Contractions are 2 minutes apart and lasting a full minute. We're 10 minutes from the hospital." "That's fast progression for a first baby," Dr. Kim said, concern threading through her professional calm. "Leah, can you feel any pressure, any urge to push?" "Not yet," Leah managed between gasps. "Just pain, so much pain." "That's normal. Keep breathing. Don't push until we've checked your cervix. I'm heading to the hospital now. I'll meet you there." The drive to the hospital was the longest 10 minutes of Damien's life. Leah gripped his hand between contractions, her nails digging into his palm hard enough to leave marks. He didn't care. Would have let her break every bone in his hand if it helped. They pulled up to the emergency entrance. Damien barely had the car in park before he was out, grabbing a wheelchair from inside the sliding doors, getting Leah settled. "I can walk," she protested weakly. "You shouldn't have to," Damien said, already pushing her toward the elevators. "Just let me help, Leah, please." The labor and delivery unit was calm this early in the morning, just a few nurses at the station who looked up when Damien wheeled Leah in. One of them, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and efficient movements, took one look at Leah and immediately sprang into action. "How far apart are contractions?" "About 90 seconds now," Damien said. "And you are?" "The father?" The nurse nodded. No judgment, no questions. "Let's get you into a room and see where we're at. What's your name, honey?" "Leah?" "Leah Arden. Dr. Kim is my OB." "Good, Dr. Kim's excellent. Let's get you changed into a gown and checked." The next hour was a blur of medical efficiency. Nurses hooking Leah up to monitors, checking her vitals, examining her cervix. Dr. Kim arrived looking surprisingly awake for 3 in the morning, her expression shifting from calm to concerned when she saw the monitor readings. "You're at 7 centimeters, she told Leah. "This baby's in a hurry. We need to talk about pain management options now, because you might not have time for an epidural if things keep progressing this fast." "I want the epidural," Leah said through gritted teeth. "I know I said I wanted to try natural, but I can't. This is too much." "No judgment," Dr. Kim said firmly. "Let me call the anesthesiologist. We'll get you some relief." But the anesthesiologist was in another delivery, and by the time he arrived 20 minutes later, Leah was at 9 centimeters and screaming through contractions that came so close together there was barely time to breathe between them. "I'm sorry," the anesthesiologist said, his expression genuinely apologetic. "You're too far along. The epidural could slow your labor or cause complications at this stage. I can offer IV pain medication, but—" "No," Leah sobbed. "No, I can't do this. I can't." "Yes, you can," Damien said, kneeling beside the bed, taking her hand. "Leah, look at me. You're the strongest person I know. You carried our daughter alone for 8 months. You survived bed rest and fear and me being an absolute disaster. You can do this. I know you can." "It hurts," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Damien, it hurts so much." "I know. I'm so sorry. But it means Elena's almost here. It means you're almost done. Just a little longer and you'll have our daughter in your arms." Another contraction hit. Leah's back arched, her hand crushing Damien's, a sound tearing from her throat that he'd never heard a human make. When it passed, she looked at him with eyes that were all pain and determination. "Don't leave," she gasped. "Please. I know I said I didn't want you here, but I can't. I need you. "I'm not going anywhere," Damien promised, smoothing her hair back from her sweat-soaked face. "I'm right here. I'm not leaving. Whatever you need, I'm here." Dr. Kim checked her again. "You're fully dilated. Leah, next contraction. I need you to push. Can you do that for me?" What followed was the most terrifying, awe-inspiring, humbling 90 minutes of Damien's life. Leah pushed through contractions that came relentlessly, her whole body straining, her hand gripping his like he was the only solid thing in a world gone liquid with pain. Damien counted, breathed with her, whispered encouragement that felt inadequate but was all he had to give. "You're doing amazing," Dr. Kim said, her voice steady and calm. "I can see her head. Dark hair, lots of it. A few more pushes, Leah. You're so close." "I can't," Leah sobbed. "I can't do it. I'm too tired." "You can," Damien said fiercely. "Leah, you can. One more push, just one more. You're going to meet Elena. You're going to hold our daughter. Just one more." Leah gathered herself, some reserve of strength Damien didn't know existed, and pushed with everything she had left. And then, suddenly, impossibly, there was a cry. Not Leah's, a smaller sound, outraged and strong and absolutely perfect. "She's here," Dr. Kim said, lifting a tiny, vernix-covered, absolutely beautiful baby girl. "Leah, you did it. She's here." They placed Elena on Leah's chest, skin to skin, and Damien watched his daughter open her eyes for the first time. Dark eyes, unfocused but seen. She had Leah's nose, his strong chin, a shock of dark hair matted to her tiny skull. She was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. Leah was crying, her hands cradling Elena with infinite gentleness, whispering words Damien couldn't hear through his own tears. 5 pounds, 8 ounces, a nurse announced, doing quick measurements. 18 inches long. APGAR scores are 9 and 10. Absolutely perfect. Damien couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, could only stare at the two most important people in his world. The woman he'd loved and failed and was learning to love better, and the daughter he'd already do anything to protect. "Do you want to cut the cord, Dad?" Dr. Kim asked, holding out surgical scissors. Damien looked at Leah. She nodded, exhausted but smiling. With shaking hands, Damien cut the cord that had connected his daughter to her mother for 9 months. The symbolic severing of one bond and the beginning of countless new ones. After they cleaned Elena and wrapped her in a soft blanket, they handed her to Damien. He held her carefully, terrified of doing it wrong, of hurting this tiny, fragile miracle. She fit in his hands, all 7 pounds of her, warm and alive in his. "Hi, Elena," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I'm your dad, and I promise, I'm going to be here every day, every night, every moment you need me. I'm not going anywhere." Elena yawned, a tiny sound that made Damien's heart clench. Then she settled against his chest, her miniature hand curling around his finger with surprising strength. He looked up to find Leah watching them, her expression soft and unguarded for the first time in months. "She's perfect," Leah whispered. "She is," Damien agreed, "just like her mother." And for that one perfect moment, surrounded by monitors and medical equipment and the sharp smell of antiseptic, they were a family. Broken, complicated, still figuring out what they were to each other. But a family nonetheless. The hospital kept them for 2 days. Standard procedure for first-time mothers, Dr. Kim explained, just to make sure both Leah and Elena were stable before sending them home. Damien didn't leave. He slept in the uncomfortable chair beside Leah's bed, woke every 2 hours when the nurses came to check vitals, learned how to change diapers, and swaddle a baby who seemed determined to escape every blanket they wrapped her in. He watched Leah learn to breastfeed, saw the frustration and pain on her face when it didn't come naturally, saw the relief when the lactation consultant helped them find a position that worked. He held Elena while Leah showered, walked the hallways at 3 in the morning when their daughter decided sleep was optional, and felt his entire understanding of love reconstruct itself around this tiny person who'd existed for less than 48 hours. On the second afternoon, while Leah was napping and Elena was sleeping peacefully in the bassinet beside her bed, Damien's mother arrived. Gabriella Vescari swept into the hospital room like she owned it, her eyes immediately finding the bassinet. She stopped, her expression softening in a way Damien had rarely seen. "She's beautiful," Gabriella whispered, moving closer. "Can I hold her?" "Let me," Damien said quietly, carefully lifting Elena. She stirred but didn't wake as he placed her in his mother's arms. Gabriella looked down at her granddaughter with an expression of such profound tenderness that Damien felt something shift in his chest. This was the woman who'd survived 3 assassination attempts, who'd buried 2 husbands and built an empire on their graves, who'd raised Damien to be ruthless and strategic and emotionally controlled, and she was crying. "She has your father's eyes," Gabriella said softly. "Antonio's eyes. I thought I'd never see them again." Damien hadn't thought about his father in weeks, had been too consumed with the present to dwell on the past. But now, watching his mother hold his daughter, he felt the weight of 3 generations pressing down. "I don't want to be like him," Damien said quietly. "I don't want Elena to grow up the way I did, watching her father choose empire over family, learning that love comes second to power." Gabriella looked up, her eyes sharp despite the tears. "Then don't be like him. Your father loved you, Damien, but he loved control more. He died because he couldn't delegate, couldn't trust anyone else to handle threats, had to personally oversee every operation, and it got him killed." She looked back down at Elena. "You have a chance to be different, to choose differently. Don't waste it." "I'm trying." "I know. I've been watching." Gabriella's smile was small but genuine. "The restructuring, the therapy, the way you've shown up for Leah even when she made it clear she didn't want you there. You're learning what your father never did, that real power isn't about control, it's about knowing when to surrender." Leah stirred then, waking slowly. Her eyes opened, focused first on Elena and Gabriella's arms, then widened with recognition and wariness. "Mrs. Vescari," Leah said, her voice careful. "Leah." Gabriella moved to the bedside, still holding Elena. "Congratulations. She's absolutely perfect." "Thank you." Leah sat up carefully, her body still recovering from delivery. "Would you like to, if you want to visit with her?" "I'd love to," Gabriella said warmly. Then, surprising both Damien and Leah, she sat on the edge of the bed and spoke with uncharacteristic vulnerability. "I owe you an apology, Leah. When Damien told me about the divorce, I didn't reach out. I told myself it wasn't my place, that your marriage was your business. But the truth is, I was relieved. I thought a wife without children would weaken Damien's position, make him vulnerable. I was wrong." Leah's expression was unreadable. "Thank you for saying that." "I want to be in Elena's life," Gabriella continued, "not as the head of a crime family, but as her grandmother, as someone who can teach her that being a Viscari means more than power and fear. It means resilience. It means surviving. It means choosing love even when the world tells you it's weakness." She looked at Damien. "If you'll let me." "That's not my decision," Damien said, looking at Leah. "It's Leah's." All eyes turned to Leah, who looked overwhelmed and exhausted and achingly young despite being a mother now. She studied Gabriella for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Elena deserves to know her grandmother," Leah said quietly. "But Mrs. Viscari, I need you to understand. I'm not raising my daughter in that world. I'm not raising her to think power matters more than people. If you want to be part of her life, it has to be as a grandmother who loves her, not as a matriarch grooming an heir." Gabriella smiled, and it was warm and real. "I wouldn't have it any other way. And Leah? Call me Gabriella. We're family now, whether the paperwork says so or not." She stayed for an hour, holding Elena, asking Leah about the delivery, offering advice that was surprisingly practical and not at all about empire building. When she left, she kissed both Leah and Elena on the forehead, then pulled Damien into the hallway. "That woman is steel wrapped in silk," Gabriella said quietly. "Don't lose her again. Whatever it takes, whatever you have to change, don't let her go." "I'm trying, Ma, but she doesn't trust me, and I don't blame her." "Then earn it back." Gabriella's hand cupped his cheek, her eyes fierce. "One day at a time. One choice at a time. Show her that the man she married is the man you're becoming, not the coward you were." She left, and Damien returned to the room to find Leah feeding Elena, her expression distant. "Your mother is intense," Leah said quietly. "That's putting it mildly." Damien settled back into his chair. "But she meant what she said, about wanting to be a real grandmother." "I know, I could tell." Leah adjusted Elena's position, wincing slightly. "It's just, everything's happening so fast. 2 days ago, I was pregnant and alone and terrified. Now I have a daughter, and you're here, and your mother's promising to be involved, and I don't know how to process any of it. You don't have to process it all at once, Damien said gently. Just take it one moment at a time. Right now, in this moment, you're feeding our daughter. That's enough. Leah's eyes filled with tears. I'm scared, Damien. What if I can't do this? What if I'm a terrible mother? What if I mess her up the way... She stopped, pressed her lips together. The way I messed us up? Damien finished quietly. I was going to say the way my parents messed me up. But, yes, that too. Leah wiped her eyes with her free hand. I don't want Elena to grow up feeling like she has to earn love. Like she's only valuable if she's useful. I don't want her to... Her voice broke. I don't want her to feel the way you made me feel. The words landed like physical blows, but Damien forced himself to hear them, to sit with the pain they caused instead of defending or explaining. Then we make sure she doesn't, he said finally. We love her unconditionally. We show up even when it's hard. We tell her every single day that she matters just because she exists, not because of what she can do or be or achieve. We? Leah's voice was sharp. Damien, there is no we. We're co-parents, that's all. You can't just... I know, Damien interrupted gently. I know I don't have the right to we when it comes to us. But when it comes to Elena, we're in this together, whether we're together or not. And Leah, I'm going to prove to you that I've changed, not by saying it, but by showing you, every day, for as long as it takes. Before Leah could respond, Elena finished feeding and immediately spit up all over Leah's hospital gown. The moment broke, shifting from heavy emotion to the practical reality of new parenthood. Damien grabbed towels, helped Leah clean up, took Elena while Leah changed into a fresh gown. And somehow, in the mundane chaos of spit up and crying and exhaustion, the tension eased. Dr. Kim discharged them the next morning with a stack of instructions, follow-up appointment cards, and a reminder to call immediately if Leah developed a fever or excessive bleeding. You're going to be fine, Dr. Kim said, squeezing Leah's shoulder. You're stronger than you think. And Leah? She glanced at Damien. Let him help. I know it's complicated, but you don't have to do everything alone. Damien had arranged for a car service, something comfortable and safe with a properly installed car seat. They drove to Leah's brownstone in Brooklyn, Damien hyper-aware of every bump in the road, every sudden break, every potential danger to the precious cargo in the back seat. When they arrived, Damien carried Elena's car seat while Leah moved slowly up the steps, her body still recovering. Inside, the brownstone was warm and welcoming, decorated in soft colors and filled with the supplies well-meaning friends had dropped off. Diapers, wipes, bottles, more stuffed animals than one baby could possibly need. The nursery's upstairs, Leah said, gesturing vaguely. Second door on the right. Damien climbed the stairs, found the room Leah had described at dinner weeks ago. It was exactly as she'd said, soft grays and whites with pops of pale yellow, a crib with a mobile of stars and moons, a rocking chair positioned near the window. It was beautiful and thoughtful, and absolutely nothing like the nursery he'd created in his penthouse. All dark woods and expensive furnishings, and the kind of perfection that felt cold. He set the car seat down gently, looked at Elena sleeping peacefully, and felt his heart crack open all over again. It's perfect, he said when he came back downstairs. Leah was on the couch, looking exhausted and overwhelmed. Your nursery. It's exactly what she needs. Thank you. Leah's hands were shaking slightly. Damien, I don't know how to ask this without it sounding wrong, but what do you need? He asked immediately. I need help. Not forever, just for a few days while I figure out how to do this alone. My friends offered, but they have jobs and lives, and I can't ask them to... She stopped, wiped her eyes. I hate asking you, hate needing you, but I'm terrified of being alone with her. What if something happens? What if I do something wrong? What if... I'll stay, Damien said without hesitation. As long as you need. I'll sleep on the couch, stay out of your way. Just be here in case you need an extra pair of hands. You'd do that? Leah, I'd do anything. You know that. She studied him for a long moment, weighing risk against need. Then she nodded. Okay, but Damien, this doesn't change anything between us. This is about Elena, about making sure she's safe, not about us. I understand. What followed were the most exhausting, terrifying, beautiful days of Damien's life. He slept on Leah's couch, woke every 2 hours to help with feeding and diaper changes, learned the difference between hungry cries and tired cries, and the particular wail that meant Elena needed to be walked and bounced and sung to before she'd settle. He cooked meals Leah barely touched, reminded her to drink water and take her pain medication, held Elena while Leah showered or napped or just sat in the nursery and cried from exhaustion and hormones and the overwhelming responsibility of keeping a tiny human alive. And slowly, in the quiet moments between chaos, Damien saw Leah begin to trust him again. Not completely, not the way she had before, but in small ways, letting him hold Elena without hovering, falling asleep on the couch, knowing he'd wake her for the next feeding, accepting his help without questioning his motives. On the 5th night, Leah came downstairs at 2 a.m. to find Damien walking circles in the living room with Elena against his chest, humming softly. She stood in the doorway for a moment, just watching, her expression unreadable. "You're good at this," she said quietly. Damien looked up, surprised. "At what?" "Being a father. I didn't think you would be. I thought—" She paused, choosing words carefully. "I thought you'd be good at the logistics, the planning and providing and protecting, but this?" She gestured to Elena, peaceful and sleeping against his chest. "The actual work of loving her? I didn't know if you could do it." "Neither did I," Damien admitted. "I'm terrified every moment that I'm going to mess up, that I'll let her down the way I let you down." Leah moved closer, reached out to stroke Elena's soft hair. "You hurt me, Damien. Destroyed me in ways I'm still trying to recover from. But watching you with her?" Her voice cracked. "You're not the man who left. I don't know if that man would have been capable of this, of showing up at 2 a.m. without being asked, of putting her needs above your comfort, of loving her without expecting anything in return." "I'm trying to be better," Damien said quietly. "For her, for you, for myself." "I can see that." Leah sat on the couch, exhaustion written in every line of her body. "And it scares me, because part of me wants to believe you've changed, wants to let you back in, but I'm so afraid that the moment I do, the moment I trust you again, you'll prove that people don't really change, that you're still the man who left when things got hard." Damien carefully transferred Elena to her bassinet, made sure she was settled, then sat beside Leah on the couch, not touching, but close enough that he could feel her warmth. "I can't promise I won't make mistakes," he said honestly. "I can't promise I'll always get it right, or that there won't be moments where I fail you both. But Leah, I can promise this. I will never walk away again. Not from Elena. Not from you. Even if we're never together again, even if you decide you can't forgive what I did, I will show up, every day, however you need me to." Leah's hands twisted in her lap. "I don't know how to forgive you. I don't even know if I want to, because forgiving you feels like saying what you did was okay. And it wasn't okay, Damien. It nearly destroyed me." "I know. And I'm not asking you to say it was okay. I'm just asking you to let me prove that I'm not that man anymore. That the person I'm becoming is someone worthy of our daughter. And maybe someday, worthy of you." They sat in silence. Two people who'd loved each other badly, trying to figure out if there was a path forward that didn't involve more pain. "Stay," Leah said finally. "Not just for a few more days. Stay until I feel steady. Until I can do this without being terrified every moment. Can you do that?" "As long as you need," Damien promised. Days turned into weeks. Damien moved into the guest room, established a routine. He handled the night feedings so Leah could sleep, cooked breakfast while she nursed Elena, did laundry and dishes, and all the invisible work that kept a household running. He worked remotely when Elena napped, delegating ruthlessly, cutting meetings short when he heard crying through the baby monitor. His lieutenants noticed the change. Marcus showed up one afternoon with supplies and a knowing smile. "You're different," Marcus observed, watching Damien expertly change a diaper while discussing quarterly earnings on a conference call. "Softer." "Exhausted," Damien corrected, but he smiled. "She doesn't sleep more than 2 hours at a stretch. I've forgotten what a full night's rest feels like." "It suits you," Marcus said seriously, "being human instead of untouchable." Leah's lucky. Elena's lucky. I'm the lucky one, Damien said, looking down at Elena, who was staring at him with those dark, unfocused eyes that saw more than they should. They gave me a second chance I didn't deserve. At Elena's 6-week checkup, Dr. Kim examined her thoroughly, pronounced her perfectly healthy, then looked at both of them with approval. You two are doing great, she said. Elena's gaining weight beautifully. All her milestones are on track, and you both look… She paused, studying them. You look like a team, like you're figuring it out together. Leah glanced at Damien, her expression complicated. We're trying. That's all anyone can do. Dr. Kim made a few notes in Elena's chart. Leah, how are you doing? Physically? Emotionally? Tired, overwhelmed, but okay, I think. Leah hesitated. I've been thinking about going back to work, part-time. The shelter where I volunteer needs a coordinator, and they're willing to work around my schedule. That's wonderful, Doctor, Kim said. Do you have childcare arranged? Leah looked at Damien. They hadn't discussed this, hadn't talked about what would happen when Leah was ready to reclaim her life, when the crisis period ended and they had to figure out what co-parenting actually looked like. I can adjust my schedule, Damien said carefully. Be here when Leah's working, or we could look into a nanny if Leah prefers. I don't want a nanny, Leah interrupted. Not yet. She's so small. I want her with family. She paused. If you're willing, if you can make it work with your responsibilities. I'll make it work, Damien promised. That night, after Elena was asleep and the house was quiet, Leah found Damien in the kitchen making tea. She accepted the mug he offered, stood beside him at the counter, and spoke the words he'd been waiting months to hear. I think I'm starting to forgive you. Damien's hanmun tightened on his mug. Leah, let me finish, she said quietly. I'm starting to forgive you. Not because what you did was okay, not because the pain has gone away, but because I've watched you for 2 months straight being the father Elena deserves, being the partner I needed even though we're not partners, showing up every single day without asking for credit or recognition or anything in return. She turned to face him, her eyes wet but steady. You've changed, Damien, and I fought seeing it because acknowledging that change means acknowledging that maybe we could try again. And that terrifies me more than anything, because if I let you back in and you leave again, I don't know if I'd survive it. I won't leave, Damien said, setting down his mug so he could take her hands. Leah, I swear to you on everything that matters, I will never leave again. Not you, not Elena, not this life we're building. I know my word doesn't mean much after what I did, but I'm asking you to trust it one more time. Trust that I've learned, that I've grown, that the man standing in front of you now understands what he almost lost. Leah searched his face, looking for lies, for cracks, for any sign that this was manipulation or temporary change that would fade when things got hard again. But whatever she saw made her shoulders drop, her defenses crack. I want to try, she whispered. I want to see if we can build something real out of the ruins we made. But Damien, I need time. I need to take this slow. I need to know that you're choosing me because you love me, not because I'm Elena's mother or because you feel guilty. I love you, Damien said, and his voice broke on the words. I've loved you since the day we met. I just loved empire more, loved control more, loved certainty more. But now you're the only certainty I need, you and Elena. Everything else is negotiable. Leah pulled one hand free, cupped his face, her thumb brushing away tears he hadn't realized were falling. Then prove it, not with grand gestures, not with promises. Just keep showing up, keep being present, keep choosing us over everything else. Can you do that? Every day, Damien promised, for the rest of my life. She kissed him then, soft and tentative and full of hope and fear and all the complicated emotions that came with trying to rebuild trust from ashes. It wasn't the passionate kiss of new lovers or even the comfortable kiss of long-married couples. It was something more fragile and more valuable, the kiss of two people choosing to try again despite every reason not to. When they pulled apart, Leah was crying, but she was smiling too. We're doing this, she said, wonder in her voice. We're actually trying again. We're doing this, Damien confirmed. But Leah, I need you to know, I'm not moving back into your bedroom. Not until you're ready. Not until you trust me enough to be that vulnerable again. I'll wait however long it takes. Thank you, she whispered, for understanding, for not pushing. They stood in the kitchen, hands linked, two people who'd destroyed each other, learning how to build something better from the pieces. The next 6 months were a masterclass in patience, communication, and learning to love better. Damien moved permanently into Leah's brownstone, taking the guest room and slowly earning his way back into her heart. They went to couples therapy, sat across from Dr. Reeves, and unpacked the dynamics that had destroyed their marriage. Damien's control issues, Leah's tendency to make herself small, the way they'd both used the infertility diagnosis as an excuse to avoid harder conversations about what they needed from each other. They learned to fight productively, to speak truth without cruelty, to ask for what they needed instead of expecting the other person to read minds. They learned that rebuilding trust was exhausting, messy work with no shortcuts and no guarantees. And through it all, Elena grew. She smiled for the first time at 8 weeks, laughed at 12, started reaching for things at 4 months. She became a person with preferences and personality. She hated being cold, loved bath time, would only sleep if someone was singing to her. Damien watched Leah blossom into motherhood, saw her strength and resilience, marveled at how she managed to work part-time at the shelter, care for Elena, and still make time to rebuild their relationship. She was extraordinary, and he made sure to tell her so every single day. On a Saturday morning in October, when Elena was 6 months old and the brownstone was filled with autumn light, Damien woke to find Leah standing in his doorway. "Can we talk?" she asked quietly. Damien sat up, immediately alert. "Is Elena okay?" "She's fine, sleeping peacefully, which means we actually have time to have an adult conversation." Leah came into the room, sat on the edge of his bed. "I've been thinking." "About?" "About us. About this weird limbo we're in where we're together but not really together. Where you sleep in the guest room and we co-parent beautifully, but I won't let you all the way back in." She took a breath. "I'm ready, Damien. I'm ready to try for real. To let you back into my life completely. Into my heart completely." Damien's chest tightened. "Leah, you don't have to. I'm not saying it because I think I should, or because enough time has passed, or because you've earned it. I'm saying it because I want to. Because watching you be an incredible father has reminded me why I fell in love with you. Because I see who you've become, and I like that person. I trust that person." Her eyes filled with tears. "I love that person." I love you," Damien said, pulling her close. "I've never stopped loving you. Even when I left, even at my worst, you were the one thing I couldn't let go of in my heart." "Then let's do this right," Leah said. "Let's get remarried. Not because of Elena. Not because it's practical or strategic or because it makes co-parenting easier, but because we want to. Because we choose each other." Damien pulled back, studied her face. "Are you sure? Leah, if you have any doubts—" "I don't," she said firmly. "I spent months terrified you'd leave again." "But you haven't. You've stayed through sleepless nights and my hormonal breakdowns and Elena's colic and all the unglamorous reality of building a life together. You've proven that you meant it, that you changed, that you're here for the long haul." "Then yes," Damien said, laughing through tears. "Yes, let's get remarried. Let's do it right this time. Let's build the marriage we both deserve." They married on a cold December afternoon in the same brownstone where they'd fought and cried and learned to love better. It was a small ceremony, just Dr. Reeves and Marcus and Gabriella and a handful of close friends. Leah wore a simple cream dress, held Elena on her hip while she said vows she'd written herself. "I promise to choose you," Leah said, her voice steady despite the tears. "Not because you're perfect, but because you're willing to do the work. I promise to speak truth even when it's hard, to ask for what I need instead of expecting you to guess, to trust that when you say you're here, you mean it. And Damien, I promise to love you, not for what you can give me, but for who you are. Flawed and broken and beautifully human." Damien's vows were simpler, raw. "I promise to show up," he said, his hands holding both Leah and Elena. "Every day, every moment, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. I promise to love you without conditions, to choose family over empire, to be the father Elena deserves and the husband you deserve. And Leah, I promise that I will never, never make you feel like you're not enough. Because you're everything. You always were. Dr. Reeves pronounced them husband and wife. They kissed while Elena squealed and clapped, delighted by the attention. Afterwards, Marcus pulled Damien aside while Leah was showing Elena off to Gabriella. "You did good, boss," Marcus said quietly. "Not everyone gets a second chance. Don't waste it." "I won't," Damien promised. 2 years later, Damien stood in the same Brooklyn brownstone, watching Leah chase a giggling Elena around the living room. His daughter was 2.5 now, all wild dark curls and boundless energy, and the kind of fearlessness that terrified him daily. She looked like both of them, Leah's nose, his strong jaw, eyes that shifted between dark and light depending on the angle. She was perfect. They were perfect. This life they'd built from ruins and regret, and the stubborn refusal to give up, was more than Damien had ever thought possible. Leah caught Elena, scooped her up, blew raspberries on her belly, until their daughter shrieked with laughter. Then she looked up, caught Damien watching, and smiled. "What?" she asked, moving toward him with Elena still in her arms. "Nothing," Damien said, wrapping his arms around both of them. "Just thinking about how lucky I am." "We're all lucky," Leah corrected, pressing a kiss to his jaw. "We got a second chance most people don't get." "Dada," Elena demanded, reaching for him. Damien took her, settled her on his hip, felt the now familiar weight of her trust. "What do you think, Elena?" he asked seriously. "Should we tell Mama the news?" Elena nodded enthusiastically, though she clearly had no idea what he was talking about. Leah's eyes narrowed. "What news?" Damien reached into his pocket, pulled out legal documents he'd had drawn up months ago. "I'm signing over controlling interest in the family business to a board of trustees. Legitimate business people who will transition the empire into something legal and clean over the next 5 years. I'm keeping enough involvement to ensure it's done right, but I'm stepping back, becoming a silent partner instead of the boss." Leah's eyes widened. "Damien, that's your whole legacy. Everything you built." "No," Damien said quietly, looking at Elena, then at Leah. "This is my legacy, you two. The family we're building. The life we're creating that's based on love instead of power. The rest?" He shrugged. "The rest is just business, and business isn't worth losing what matters." Leah's eyes filled with tears. "You're sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything." He kissed her softly, Elena squirming between them. "You and Elena are my empire now, the only one that matters." That night, after Elena was asleep and the house was quiet, Damien and Leah sat in the nursery-turned-toddler room, watching their daughter sleep. She was sprawled across her bed, blankets kicked off, stuffed animals scattered around her like fallen soldiers. "I never thought we'd get here," Leah said quietly, her head on Damien's shoulder. "When I found out I was pregnant and you were gone, I was so sure I'd do this alone, that I'd raise her by myself and you'd be some distant figure who showed up for birthdays if we were lucky." "I'm sorry you ever had to think that," Damien said, pressing a kiss to her hair. "I'm sorry for all of it. The fear, the loneliness, the months you carried her without me. I know, and I've forgiven you. But Damien?" She turned to look at him, her eyes serious. "I need you to forgive yourself too. You've spent 2 years punishing yourself for mistakes you've already learned from. It's time to let it go, to accept that you're not that man anymore, and stop waiting for the other shoe to drop." Damien pulled her closer, feeling the truth of her words settle into his bones. She was right. He'd spent so long trying to prove he'd changed that he'd forgotten to actually believe it himself. "Okay," he said quietly. "I'll work on it." "Good," Leah smiled. "Because I need you fully present, not half here and half waiting to fail. Our daughter needs her father whole, not held together with guilt and penance." They sat in comfortable silence, watching Elena breathe, listening to the small sounds she made in her sleep. Outside, the city hummed with late-night traffic and distant sirens, but inside this room, in this moment, there was only peace. "Dr. Kim called today," Leah said casually, "about my annual checkup next month. And she mentioned that if we wanted to try for another baby, we should probably start thinking about it. Said my fertility appears completely normal now, that whatever the original issue was has resolved or was misdiagnosed from the start." Damien went still. Another baby? Maybe, eventually, if you want to. No pressure. Leah was trying for casual, but he could hear the hope underneath. Elena should probably be a little older first. 3 or 4, maybe. Give us time to... Yes, Damien said, turning to face her. Yes, I want another baby with you. As many as you want, as many as we can handle. Not because I need heirs or legacy, but because the idea of more tiny humans who have your smile and my stubbornness sounds like the best possible future I can imagine. Leah laughed, soft and full of joy. Then we'll try, when the time is right, when we're ready. We'll be ready, Damien promised. We figured out how to do this once. We can do it again. Together. They stayed in Elena's room for another hour, just being present, just existing in the quiet miracle of the family they'd built. Eventually, Leah fell asleep against his shoulder, exhausted from a long day of chasing a toddler and managing the shelter's new programs. Damien carefully lifted her, carried her to their bedroom now, not his, not separate spaces but truly shared. He tucked her in, kissed her forehead, then went back to check on Elena one more time. His daughter was still sleeping peacefully, completely unaware that she'd saved her parents' lives just by existing. Unaware that she'd taught them both what mattered, what love actually meant, what legacy was really about. Damien pulled out the leather journal he'd been writing in since before Elena was born. He turned to a fresh page and wrote one final entry. Elena, by the time you're old enough to read this, you'll know the story of how your mother and I fell apart and found our way back to each other. You'll know that I made terrible mistakes, that I hurt your mother in ways that should have been unforgivable, that I almost lost everything that mattered because I thought power was more important than love. I'm writing this final entry to tell you what I've learned, what I hope you'll carry with you as you grow into whoever you're meant to be. Legacy isn't bloodline. It's not empire or wealth or the things you leave behind when you die. Legacy is how you love, how you show up, how you choose people over power, connection over control, vulnerability over certainty. Your mother taught me that. She could have kept you from me, could have raised you alone, protected you from a man who'd proven he couldn't be trusted. Instead, she gave me a second chance I didn't deserve. She let me earn my way back into both your lives. And in doing so, she gave me the greatest gift imaginable, the chance to be your father. I hope I've done right by you. I hope when you look back on your childhood, you remember a father who showed up, who loved you without conditions, who chose you every single day, not because you achieved anything or met any expectations, but simply because you existed. And Elena, if you're reading this because something's happened to me, if I'm not there to tell you myself, know that you were loved. Fiercely, completely, unconditionally. You saved me, you and your mother. You taught me what matters. That's the real legacy. Not the empire I'm leaving behind, not the money or power or any of it, just love. Simple, messy, imperfect, beautiful love. Thank you for being mine. Thank you for existing. Thank you for giving me a reason to be better. I love you, little one. Forever and always. Dad. Damien closed the journal, placed it in the drawer where he kept all his letters to Elena. Someday, he'd give them to her. Someday she'd understand what she meant to him. But for now, he returned to bed, pulled Leah close, and fell asleep wrapped in the certainty that he was exactly where he was meant to be. The empire he'd built on fear and precision had been dismantled, restructured, transformed into something legitimate and clean. The power he'd craved had been traded for partnership. The legacy he'd thought he needed, an heir to secure succession, had become something infinitely more valuable. A daughter who would grow up knowing love wasn't conditional, and a wife who'd taught him that the strongest thing a man could do was surrender control and choose family. In the end, the diagnosis that had destroyed them became the catalyst for rebuilding something better. The lie became truth. The pain became purpose. The ruins became foundation. And Damien Vescari, former crime lord, recovered coward, devoted father, and husband, finally understood what his mother had tried to teach him all along. Real power wasn't about control. It was about knowing when to let go.